say as you start the hangout.
Yep. All right.
Live.
So we're now live.
Make sure it's not going to anyone.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. So now I'm going to hit record on Audacity. So I'm rolling.
Rolling.
All right. We're going to count off. 1, 2.
3, 4.
5, 6.
Okay. That was even in rhythm this time. That was good work. Still wasn't together, but it was in rhythm. That's progress.
All right. Stop. I'm about to reverse this. You have to do 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 and watch you fail at this, and then consist it's still our fault for somehow the first person not setting the correct rhythm.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Ooh, good comeback.
Ooh, great comeback there, buddy.
Let's hurry. Given my current mood, I'm glad, that you saved all the worst arguments for this specific episode. That's a good plan there. This is gonna be the angry, bitter episode.
Look, I was looking at it and just decided that we just need to go all in.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, man. I don't think any of them are going to be as ridiculous as. Apparently, as I said, I don't know if I have anything nearly as strong as apparently I had against X-Men. So, and no one, and you're expected to be a curmudgeon, so no one's going to notice that.
It's fine. You're just racist against mutants.
Oh yeah, totally. Once again, the one who likes way more X-Men movies than both of you.
Mm.
I heard Patrick Stewart says "fuck" quite a bit in the new X-Men movie, which is pretty funny to me.
Oh, sorry.
That's definitely what.
I'm sorry. I go and keep talking about stuff. I forgot I had that. We've run out of movies that there's like 9 total that you guys agreed on, and only 6 total that in total one of you agree with me on. So I have to actually organize this a little differently. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
That's right. Just that was like the one thing all the X-Men movies are missing. Patrick Stewart.
I just want to see the X-Men movie where he he uses his powers. He's like walking along, and like he sees a woman, and he uses his powers to strip her clothes off, and then he can just see everything.
She tries to cover up.
You are in fine form tonight.
But I mean, it's too late.
Right. He's already seen everything. It's too late for her to cover up.
He's seen everything.
Amy knows what I'm talking about.
Oh dear. This is gonna be
David, what I'm referencing is the Edward Muybridge photos. That's specifically what this is about.
I'm going to kill you. You pretentious little prick.
We're not allowed to use that word. It's the P word.
That's right. David doesn't know what you're talking about either. David, he's talking about Vitruvius. I'm sorry, that was my fault.
So you're just trying. I see. Well, I know what you're trying to do. It's a good effort.
You don't know how hard I tried to put in like 3 different movie scenes involving piano players in the Old West just because I wanted to do it.
Honestly, that would have been better than most of the shit you did. I'm gonna be honest, because that is actually a real thing that involves discussions. So if you had done that, I would have probably been much less annoyed with you.
Well, the problem is I wanted to do the Hateful Eight scene where he plays Silent Night on the piano, and it's not on the internet.
No. Sorry, you were foiled by the internet.
I was. I have not seen either of the movies remaining in your top 10, David.
Fine. Okay, this is about the best I can do, with the exception of let me move this up sooner because there's 3 films left that you guys watched that I haven't actually seen. So if we're gonna do this, let's just do it early. I've seen of the top 10 ones. Well, I haven't seen one of Amy's, and I haven't seen one of yours. So
Can't believe you've never seen Ratatouille. That's just crazy.
yep, that's the one. It's totally not Nightcrawler.
Oh, you haven't seen Nightcrawler?
Wait, you haven't seen Nightcrawler?
No.
You fucking anti-mutant.
Uh huh. Yeah, you're just gonna mine this for as much gold as you can, aren't you? I'm just hoping you're gonna get me to say something you can. Yeah.
And in my defense, that is how you get gold, is by mining.
Boy. Well, I look forward to what is sure to be some very high energy conversations that, if responded with me being very not high energy, it's gonna be great. This should allow you to perfectly set yourself up to be able to try and hurt me in every way possible at one point. Oh. No, that's how I guess it should go.
Oh, Dave, I hurt everybody equally.
Oh, that didn't get moved. That's what happened. Okay.
What did you think of the Amazon stuff?
I mean, I guess it's fine. I'm not going to just go on a way to put stuff in there for no reason.
Well, it's supposed to be the stuff that we have.
Well, look, if it comes up, I'll put some there. I guess. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I'm glad we have it. If you're asking if this means I will remember every time to put something in there, it's absolutely not going to happen. But sure.
Mm-hmm.
Make this. That should allow me to. Okay. This is as good as I think it can go. Okay. I have not seen Nightcrawler, and I haven't seen Upstream Color.
I don't know what that noise is, but it needs to not happen when we're actually recording.
I don't know what noise you're even talking about.
You hear this, right, Amy?
I hear that noise. Yeah, it's a popping, cracking sound.
There's literally nothing happening. I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
And David, you're kind of breaking up.
It's possible it's just the connection's bad, but like.
Can you? Well, we're okay. We're gonna stop recording because this is just like 10 minutes of bullshit that I don't need. So let's stop recording. Delete with that, and open up a new file. Don't hit record yet. David, you need to send me a 30-second file of you talking.
Okay. Can we delete the whole file?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's no other way to do this. I need to make sure that it's not happening.
And I mean, I think that's just this is what happens because you had me switch over to my headset, and my headset is shit, which I told you before. So this is just what you have to accept and live with the fact that our sound's going to suck sometimes, and we just need to move the fuck on and stop dealing and stop worrying about it. But I'm talking as I'm recording, which is really me just bitching about having to record this. So enjoy this 30 seconds of me bitching nonstop at you. And I'll stop it at exactly 30 seconds. So I hope you enjoy, because this is just the most fun in existence. And stop.
David, I think you need to turn that frown upside down.
All right. It's over to you.
Yeah, I guess we'll just go with it. Everybody ready to record again?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, I am hitting record, and I'm rolling.
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 1, 2.
3, 4.
5, 6.
Okay. Take it away, Dave.
Yep. Oh. Hold on, I have to pretend I'm in a good mood apparently for this podcast. Give me a second.
Energy, just like they taught us in directing school.
Just like they taught me on speech team. Yeah.
My direction instructor is George Lucas, so all I can tell you is just do it faster with more intensity.
Oh, okay. That will fix the problem. Hello, and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast, your dose of pop culture deep within the belly of the beast. I'm your host, David Robertson, editor-in-chief of We've Always Lived in the Kraken blog. Alongside me, I have, as always, managing editor of the same blog, Josh Kayusewicz.
Welcome to the Thunderdome. 3 people enter, 3 people leave, and some movies they voted on.
Yes, it's more like the little Thunderdome or like Thunderdome Mini or maybe the nice Thunderdome. I'm not really sure. Also joining us, we have special contributor Amy Atomica Davison.
I really think we should do more things in domes. It's the way of the future.
Wait, yeah. I mean, I guess it's true. Domes do protect against a lot of things. Sports stadiums finally realized that domes are probably the best way since, prevents this thing called weather, which generally is a good idea.
Counter argument, under the dome.
I mean, that was like an invisible dome, though. I mean, you have to know what, the key obviously is you have to have a dome people can leave. You can't just trap people in it. It doesn't work then. But I mean, the optional domes. That's obviously the way of the future.
Domes in moderation.
Domes in moderation. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think Aristotle said that.
all domes in moderation.
Probably somehow did. So we're continuing on our pursuit of making our own top 100 films of the 21st century.
Hour 35. The journey continues.
Well, what's sad is we're saying this now, and when it is actual hour 35, you'll wish we hadn't wasted that joke. So, we've already gone through our unanimous selections, and we're in the middle of going through the ones that have near unanimous consent, but not quite. So far, pretty much everything we've had has been confirmed. But for the last 15, well, just a quick reminder, the way this section works is there are 2 people who voted for the movie and 1 person who dissented. The 2 people who voted for will offer up their reasoning behind why this film is amazing. The 1 weird person will offer why they disagree. There will be a vote. The weird person will probably lose, and then that film will go on the list. If it somehow doesn't happen, well, there's a process. We'll get into it if it ever actually happens. And Caillou continues to believe that today will be the day.
Hope springs eternal. That one of you will come to your senses.
Sorry.
I doubt it. I won't come into my senses. You can't make me.
This one will also be a little bit different because this is where you'll begin to really notice that my list is the one that differs the most from their 2 lists, as I will have the least amount of shared films of the remaining 15, and there will be a slew of them, which I am the odd man out. So we'll just get used to this now, because this will continue for the rest of the time.
Very odd.
Yep, sure. Why not? Anyhow, moving on to the first film we will discuss. This is a film that both Amy and Caillou voted on, but I did not, and that is Steven Soderbergh's Ocean 11.
Yeah.
I will let Amy start. Go ahead.
How do you not like Ocean's 11? That movie's just fun on a bun. That movie is just really great. And I don't know, Soderbergh has this really interesting way of not being able to connect with people. His films tend to be kind of cold and sterile, except for his Ocean's movies. They're like super bright and fun and warm and funny. And really shine due to the cast. The plots are all kind of ridiculous and impossible and everything. But no, it took basically the concept of the Rat Pack movie, which is awful and boring, and made it what it should have been. Just, Hollywood's best and brightest, having a lot of fun on screen and looking pretty. It doesn't hurt that Soderbergh is really good finding places to put the camera.
Fair enough. Caillou, you have stuff to add to this?
Yeah, this is. I agree. This is a huge amount of fun. It's probably my favorite Soderbergh movie. Like, I like Soderbergh abstractly because I respect how he's able to go from one movie to the next and shoot very quickly and make lots of different types of things. But in reality, this is probably my favorite, and it's because it's got a phenomenal cast. It's a really crackling script. It never lags in its pacing. It's, there's a great twist to it, which is kind of hard to do when you're doing a good heist movie. And yeah, like this movie is kind of, we have a lot of like critics movies and already films on this list. And this is kind of, in my opinion, one of the gold standards for like a mainstream Hollywood movie. That uses star power without just coasting on it. That looks good without looking boring. That engages with a little bit of ideas, a little bit of emotion, and just pulls you through a good story. Like, this is one of those, like, I'm not saying it's Casablanca, but it's along the same lines of, like, it's not great because it's tremendously deep. It's just great because it's all around great, and there are few enough of those movies out there that this is I think worth celebrating.
Yeah,
and I will say briefly, sorry. I will say quickly, this is the best of the series.
Oh, man, why do you want to get all contentious right at the end? No, I can't pick a favorite. I love them all, and for different reasons. But, it's hard to, say it's my favorite Soderbergh, just because, like I say, he's a really great academic director. And he's worked in so many different genres successfully. It's really something. But yeah, this movie is just so much fun. And definitely probably the movie I have the most fun with from his filmography.
Yeah, why do you hate fun, David?
Yeah, tell us.
Since you like to throw that question at me.
Well, and then as always, as most of us respond, my, of course, response is that, of course, I don't hate this movie, but, didn't make my top 100, which is, in fact, not a crime. This is a fun movie. It's good. I enjoy them a lot. It comes down to one of those ones where, I don't know, it never really screamed top 100 film of the 21st century to me. Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the movie. I just don't think it's good enough. I will kind of also say you brought up a good point about liking Soderbergh in the abstract, and that, like, thinking back, it kind of, I think if this doesn't actually get on there, I don't think any Soderbergh will get on our list.
Which is weird, isn't it?
Which is weird, but at the same time, I think that kind of proves my point about planes. So just hold on.
I'm going to use this time to open a soda.
Sure.
I'll be quiet.
uses time to read more Ta-Nehisi Coates.
We just hear like a loud crash. It's like, I think this goes wrong opening that soda.
Caillou, were you pointing me toward your new Westworld piece?
Yeah, well, it's posted, so you just go to the website.
I did go to the website.
Is it not there?
I'm asking you, is that the one you're asking me about? The Westworld piece?
Yeah, sorry.
That's right. No, that's fantastic. I like it.
So we good? Ready to go? Did you get your soda open, Amy?
Did you read it?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. See, Amy
I
likes
haven't read all of it.
I
mean,
not
it
surprised.
is a bit pretentious, but in a good way.
It's okay. Well, that's wrong, but sure, you're entitled to your own opinion.
About what, being pretentious or being good?
It's pretentious in the wrong way.
But I mean, I think that's the whole point of the thing. I mean, he's trying to analyze something that he's not familiar with and hasn't seen. He's projecting analysis upon it.
Well, there's
no way that's not pretentious.
Oh, I don't mind it being pretentious, theoretically. I told him the problem is to fix the problems I have with his pretension would actually require him to write more words, and no.
David thinks that it's empty pretension that I don't say anything in the piece. I disagree, obviously.
Of course you disagree.
You're not normally known for being empty.
I don't find any of the stuff he actually says to be anything that, like, it's all mostly pretty obvious stuff that I don't think actually is that deep of an actual look at the piece. But, it's fine. Most people get caught up in the base level stuff, so it's fine.
Well, and that's always the academic problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think probably 99.5% of the Western reviewers, not only don't care about the deconstruction of the opening credits, but wouldn't understand it if you explained it to them.
Well, right, which is why I said it wasn't worth actually fixing. But it was more just if you're going to do something like this is the type of really deep dive retention. Like I told you, I was both angry at the fact that the piece and angry at the fact that I actually wanted to go deeper into his retention. There's a lot of anger.
But I mean, a lot of it, it's really good. I mean, I like to read Caillou's more academic stuff because he really knows his shit and can articulate it well.
Well, right. I have higher standards for his academic stuff, so I don't think it was as deep as he could have gone, or as good as he could have.
Burn.
I bet. So
I think it took me 3 weeks to power my way through actually completing this article, so it's posted.
I know, Caillou, hence why I agreed, said just post it.
Film nerd.
It's almost like you just articulated my exact thinking in my head when I told you to post it. All right. But yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
No, I was saying, my feeling is that there's plenty of places on the web for really unhelpful criticism and analysis. And, if you want to go to those places to read easy stuff, then go do it.
I mean,
my stuff is hard for better.
You're right. I could, or I could just go read that piece because everything you wrote
smart.
was really easy stuff and wasn't hard. So, Thank you for proving my point.
I'm sorry, Caillou. I'm trying to defend you, but not doing very well.
No, he's just an untractable ass. So, David, continue railing against the fun of this great heist movie.
I'm sorry I made the mistake of again holding you to a higher standard than I should have. It was my bad.
Your standards are impossible.
That would look. Non-dead inside Caillou hadn't lost his writing spark wouldn't have said that. That's why I had to accept this.
I've begun holding myself to my own standards because I prefer them.
Anyhow. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the weird thing, though, and I think not having a Soderbergh film on the list would almost actually be a better representation of how I think most of us actually feel about Soderbergh than how we think we would like to feel about him. I mean, if one's going to be on the list, it would be this one, or I like Traffic, I think, more than at least Caillou does, but, it didn't make my list either. But I mean, I just never really, I like a lot of it happened in this series, and unlike, for example, I would actually also probably agree with Caillou that I think this is the best one. of the three. It's certain. I mean, threes, there's a little bit of an argument. I'm not a huge fan of two, but that's just because I think that they all had so much fun on set, but they didn't really care about having fun, like the audience having fun as much. But
two's my favorite.
Well, in a real sense, the one of the reasons that one works so well, in my opinion, is that there is in fact a real conflict in there at the center of the all the like fun and star power of like George Clooney trying to prove to both his ex-wife and his ex-wife's new lover that he is a person of value, that his particular set of skills are worthwhile, and make him a strong and competitive person in the realm of romance and everything else. And that's really missing from I think the other two. The second one has this artificial thing that's there's nothing in the second one that is as real as that feeling that Clooney absolutely sells in his scenes with Julia Roberts. And so that's why I think the first one is head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, 2, 3, I think actually is pretty decent return to form. But yes, I do agree that I kind of also felt there was always something missing from some key part that seemed to be in the first one was the next two. But since I don't want this to totally go into just a massive discussion of the Ocean series, we'll stay back on Ocean's 11. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like this movie. If, when inevitably you guys both vote for it in like 30 seconds, I'm not going to be that angry it's on the list. I just didn't think it was good enough to be on the list. And that's why, I'm not going to change my vote, because I don't think it's good enough to be on the list. And I actually think the more I think about it, the more I actually think Soderbergh not making this list actually is a more appropriate thing, considering how Soderbergh's work actually is honestly perceived by most people.
But regardless of the rest of his work, like, real quick, he like, movies that are this good in the mainstream Hollywood vein are much rarer than people think. And so I think it's important to recognize them when they do achieve the heights that this one achieves, simply by being a very, very good example of like what Hollywood should do regularly but doesn't.
I mean, I think there were better versions of that too. So, I mean, I just didn't think it was, I mean, even by that standard, I think there are better movies that also probably didn't make my list. So, I mean, just to say, I didn't think it was good enough. It's just how it is. Like, I'm perfectly fine with it being on the list, but as I said, I'm not changing my vote.
Well, that just makes you a pretentious curmudgeon.
Well, we're already going to find that out later anyhow, because my list apparently is full of all the pretension, so it's fine. But anyhow, like I said...
Why don't you like movies that speak American?
Yep, so my vote's no. I assume Caillou's vote is from the fact that he is now trying to make me sound like a pretentious film critic, still yes. And Amy, I'm also going to assume you have not changed your vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did at least.
What?
What?
I think we still need at least one Soderbergh on here, and it's pretty strong argument that it's his best one. So I'm voting yes.
Hooray.
Just wait, did that cut out on you as well, Caillou? Or?
Yeah, it did. But I'm sure her Audacity has it.
Okay. Oh, sorry. And with that, on the list it goes. We're now going to keep moving along to another film that I am the outlier on, and that is mainly because I'm fairly certain in this case because I haven't seen it, and that is Tinker Tailor Spy. Which
that is not the name of that movie. It's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
That's interesting. I pulled that off of like a list, so someone else did that wrong.
Probably. You go back and redo that, please.
Yeah. Maybe if you saw that, you wouldn't have messed that up.
Maybe. I mean, considering I just copied off of some other list, some other person's list, I don't know.
Plagiarism.
Oh, yeah.
The bane of legitimate journalism.
Yes, plagiarizing, because I copied like from straight off from other lists because it didn't make sense.
Not from my list or Amy's list, because both the email I sent you has it right both times. So.
Uh-huh. I didn't say I copied. I didn't say copied off your guys' list. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I'm just clarifying for the people who aren't going to listen to this because it's going to get cut out.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Just do the thing.
Okay. I mean, just give me a second.
No.
So this movie miraculously isn't on the list anymore. That's weird. I don't know what happened. So I guess we're just moving on as if it never existed because Caillou's being an ass. So I'm going to be petty about it. All right.
You're not just being petty. You're being Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Anyhow. We're going to move on to another film on the list that I think is, of most of the ones that I haven't seen, one of the biggest ones that probably would actually be on my list if I had seen it, but I haven't. So, and that is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And Amy and Caillou have it on their list. Said I didn't have it on mine, but it's one of the ones that I always meant to get around to watching, but for whatever reason haven't. And that's all I'll pretty much say on it. So go ahead, Caillou.
I love this movie. It's based on a John le Carré novel that I haven't actually read. I've read a lot of le Carré, and he's a really great like deconstructionist spy novel guy because he actually worked in the British intelligence service for a while, and his vision is very anti-James Bond in the sense that like instead of running around shooting people in explosions, it's all like sad old men in rooms like making terrible decisions over paper files, and then like at the end of a long chain of events something awful happens in the real world. That's kind of every one of his stories. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is sort of different in that the awful stuff happens mostly at the beginning, and then the rest of it is sort of unraveling like why and how and who. So it's a really engaging mystery story. It's got a phenomenal performances across the board, but especially from Gary Oldman, who has possibly never been better, and that's saying something in a very long and illustrious career. The other thing that's really great about it is, it's directed by Thomas Alfredson. We have another movie by him on this list. He's a fantastic director who's very disciplined about making camera choices that are always thematically on point. And in this film, there's a great Bordwell and Thompson article on their blog about how Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy uses a lot of the tricks of indie cinema to kind of obscure information or give you less than a mainstream film would in terms of sussing out character motivations and plot details. And it makes for a very like elegant and interesting mystery where you really have to pay attention. And I really felt when watching this that like I was the character because I was trying to piece this together too. And so like as a mystery that like plays fair and also makes it very difficult, it's a really just unique and fantastic experience that's I think just as good the second time or third.
All right, fair enough. Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if when the second and third and so on rewatches of the film, I mean, you notice new things and you start piecing things together differently.
Yeah.
It is probably the most actively I've ever had to watch a film.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just sit back and kind of turn your brain on autopilot and watch this one. I mean, the movie is demanding, but it pays off. It rewards you for putting in the effort. It's just a great film to watch. I really loved how much of the narrative they used in non-traditional manner. They would show passage of time by like clothing choices or a character getting new glasses or something like that. I mean, it was really inventive. It was a true visual film, and just a mystery that was just very frustrating but in a good way, like a really tough puzzle.
Yeah.
Just it was fantastic. Maybe the best highbrow spy movie ever made.
Yeah, I think so. And it has a lot to say. It's not just like a fun mystery. It has a lot to say about kind of the nature of the spy game and how it's destructive to everybody in it. And, there's a lot of like doomed romance going on and doomed friendships. And it just kind of shows that like this game is, it is a game, but it's also a game that has really damaging consequences for basically everyone who's involved in it, even tangentially.
Right. This film also, I guess, pointed out is one of the films that really some people knew he hadn't seen it, but like the cinematographer, Hoyt van Hoytema, like this is the one I really felt where he really kind of exploded into the public consciousness more. He had done other stuff obviously beforehand, and like the fight, and even in American The Fighter, and then before that it was mainly in Sweden, but things like Let the Right One In. But this is the one I think that at least most people seem to. It's kind of like why when, regardless, Spectre still looked really nice, even if the rest of the movie was terrible, because he took over and it wasn't a noticeable, humongous drop between him and Deakins.
Yeah, he's less flashier, but he's still really.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, like I said, Deakins is better, but it wasn't just this giant chasm of a drop. But yes, so like I said, I have not seen this, so obviously I'm abstaining. Presumably, you two did not convince yourselves not to vote for your own movie.
No.
So we were going to
not unless one of us is a hidden double agent. Let me point that out.
I mean, look, after Attack of the Block, who knows?
You mean Attack the Block?
Well, I mean, in French, Le Carré means the block. So who the fuck knows, really?
That was a pen name because his real name was a dude who worked for the intelligence service, and he did not want them to know that he was writing like these excoriating novels while he was working there.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I vote yes.
Well, yeah, that's done. We don't need your actual vote. It's fine.
Okay.
It's obvious you voted yes, Kai. But now we've wasted the time we would have saved, so I guess it doesn't matter. Anyhow, we're now going to move on to a film I actually have both seen and voted on my list, along with Amy, and that is Lord of the Rings: Return of the King.
Yay.
I guess I will start. This is, as we said earlier, we're getting close to one of the examples of a film we did actually count as one entity, but multiple films we counted as one entity. But this is, once again, we decided to keep Lord of the Rings separate. We already talked about Fellowship earlier. Return of the King Return of the King, meanwhile, made both, like I said, mine and Amy's list. I felt that this film also was able to hold up mostly on its own. Obviously, I will acknowledge it's, even though it's on my list, it's definitely not as high as Fellowship for the reason of I don't think it holds up quite as well. I'll just get that out of the way. And there are definitely more issues I have with it than I have with Fellowship. But in general, I felt this film was able to do a lot of really interesting scope stuff, especially because this is the one that probably did the war aspects to me a lot better than most of the other ones, especially since Fellowship kind of was the prequel to that and really didn't transition it until the end. I thought this is the one in which I enjoyed, since all the actors had really gotten used to their roles. I felt most of them gave their best performances during this one. Especially, crap. Well, there's a plane anyhow. What's the guy who plays Samwise's name? Actor's name?
Sean Astin?
Yes. I will say that when the plane is gone.
I'll pretend I knew that.
What?
I said I'll pretend I knew that.
Sure. I knew you didn't know that guy. I was thinking Amy with that.
Then why did you ask me?
You happen to be on the same audio channel, so there really is no way to not ask both of you the question.
But you specifically addressed it to me. You said, Caillou, what is the name of this person? Am I crazy, Amy?
I think you might be.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't say your name. I may have said something that sounded like your name.
Maybe.
You know, Caillou, it's not all about you.
I mean, it mostly is.
Yeah, and he doesn't understand that concept. Sorry. Yeah, I felt this one had the best performances acting-wise because everyone had kind of obviously grown into the roles after being on it for so long, after having done them so thoroughly. Sean Astin was especially fantastic in this movie. He helped
Mr. Frodo.
He helped carry things over to the end. There was just, numerous great action sequences in this film. I enjoyed just the general feeling of watching. And also just, it was this does get a little bit of credit from just the fact that it pulled it off. It finished this series and it actually, you looked at it when we were done, you're like, wow, this actually happened. And this film did a good job of concluding things like it's supposed to. And a lot of, third films have trouble doing that. So it's not that's an easy task by any stretch. And to me, this film just stood out, it stood out amongst many other things, and it's constantly one of my favorite of movies. And it was also, once again, a movie that helped kind of motivate me in terms of loving movies. And yeah, Amy, would you like to continue on?
I would actually want to extrapolate off of one of your points. It is rare, and one of the big things I do judge movies on is how they stick the landing. And I don't think I don't think Return of the King stuck at 100%. I mean, they turned an ankle a little bit because there's a couple of issues here and there. But
yeah, I would agree with that.
Overall, I mean, when taken as a total project and the way that this film brings everything to a very nice and satisfying conclusion, that's increasingly rare, I think, in Hollywood. And it's just nice to have that, release at the end of it, that everything has a resolution, everything, fit the arc that it was on. And that's a trick that, even Peter Jackson couldn't pull off with The Hobbit. I mean, that movie is totally all over the place, and ends incredibly abruptly and weirdly.
Well, to be fair, The Hobbit was never meant to be multiple works of anything. So,
right, it's just you had trouble finding all the through lines for all the characters, but he didn't have that trouble with the Lord of the Rings movies, and I think Return of the King is just a massive achievement. Also, the way that they maintain the pacing throughout the running time. It's one of the few films that I can watch in its entirety at that length and not be bored, not want to fast forward, not pause it or save some for the next day. I mean, I'll even watch the extended edition that's like 4.5 hours long. I don't care. I'll put it on, and it's just riveting every time because he just keeps the pacing just going and going and churning, and everything just builds and builds and builds. And I don't know. It's so many different things at once. It's a great film.
Yeah. So Kai, you're the dissenting person, so go ahead.
I mean, look, a lot of the reason it's not on my list is that, there's only 100 films. You wouldn't let us put them all together as one trilogy the way I think they deserve, and so I had to choose, and I chose Fellowship. 10 years ago, I had 100 top movies list of all time, and all three of them were on there, and I've just seen a lot more movies since then. But I can gin up a few minor outrages against this one specifically. I think that, this is the one that gets taken to task for not including the Scouring of the Shire. I think this film has less exciting battle sequences than the second one's extended siege battle. I think that it has the points that it's pulling from Tolkien are broader because they're kind of the central points of the work. So they're more familiar and less kind of exciting. And I think that applies to the adaptation in general. I think that the third one is sort of less the second one makes some changes and the first one is very focused. And those are, those are very intentioned works. And I think this one has a little more of the gasping feel of I just want to get over the finish line and hit the high notes. So I actually think this one is probably the weakest of all of them for that reason. It just feels, a little more generic and a little less iconic than the other two.
Yeah, fair enough. Remember these arguments for later, folks, because when The Two Towers comes out, I may be making the exact same ones. So, I'm assuming based on this, Caillou, that you do not wish to change your vote?
I bow for no one, so that's a big no.
Okay. I'm going to keep my vote as yes, because I obviously have a completely different view on this compared to Caillou's view. So then if those were good points, I don't agree with them. So
I also think real quick that you guys are doing the exact same thing that the Oscars did, where you're like, oh, we're the last one for the whole series because that's the one when it ends and you feel good that it's over. And I think that's not fair when you're judging this on its own basis.
No, but I think there's a difference though between I'm not doing that as a whole, which is the main reason I want to put all of them. I do think saying it sticks the landing because that's what a third movie does has to be somewhat examined. I disagree with the Oscars. I mean, I disagreed from the Oscars that in terms of they only rewarded one of them, but at the same time, I had no problem with that getting the reward. But I think it's still slightly different because just because I'm giving it some credit for ending it doesn't mean that's the entire reason. I think this movie on its own stands up. I don't think it needs to just be a conclusion piece.
I don't know why you would ever watch this movie by itself, whereas I can totally see somebody watching like The Fellowship by itself and just stopping.
I mean, I could too, which is why I like The Fellowship better, but that's not the argument we're having right now, which is better between The Fellowship and The Return of the King.
Mm-hmm. We all pick Fellowship.
Yes.
Do you have
anything you wanted to add to his point about, I guess, the Oscars and the ending point before I presume you will also say yes still?
I will say yes, but I also, I think a lot of those Oscars given for Return of the King were, for the totality of the work and the fact that so much from the other two films was nominated but didn't win very much. I think there was only one acting nomination for the whole trilogy. And that was Ian McKellen in the first one.
Did Aston get nominated in the last one? That's the only one I can remember possibly happening.
No, he was. Warner's pushed him pretty hard, but he didn't get nominated.
See, I think that's totally fair though, because like, although I have nothing against the performances of this movie, I don't think that they're like traditionally great acting performances. I think they just like inhabit these pop roles in a competent and manner. I really don't think that there's a lot of like tremendous emotional depth or whatever on display here. That's just me.
In general, I probably don't. I agree with you for the most part. The only one I would have said, the only ones I would have really given it to were the one they actually gave to McClellan in the first one, and then I wouldn't have. If Aston had gotten one for the last one, it wouldn't have been like travesty. But in general, the individual actor performances of each is probably not the strength of the movie.
I think it says a lot about McKellen though, because I mean he was extremely popular and well-known and famous actor before he ever played Gandalf. But I mean he is Gandalf. No one else can be Gandalf. He owns that role.
And Magneto.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I think his Magneto is serviceable.
Well, now that shot's been thrown, we will continue on to a movie that got agreement from Caillou and Amy.
David's like, where was that opinion when I was arguing against X-Men?
Nope, totally not bitter about that at all, but it's fine. Mainly because I actually think he's actually a great Magneto, so I can't really argue that. But anyhow, the next film on the list was Kill Bill, which we are counting as one unit because that's kind of basically what Tarantino wanted. And if we're going to be honest, if he could have gotten away with that film being, 5 hours?
I think it would have been like 4.5.
4.5. If he could have gotten away with that, he would have absolutely done that. He just kind of had to separate them because we don't really.
Because he's smart enough not to pull like a Kenneth Lonergan or a Sergio Leone and like bash his career to death against the wall of your movie cannot be longer than like 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, so he decided to split these into two movies, but like this is one movie, so we count this as one. Caillou, you can go first.
Yeah. A lot of people accuse Tarantino of being someone who is interested in style over substance, and someone who, is more interested in kind of aping old movies than he is in presenting a clear and relatable emotional story. This is the film that I think puts the line to that. This is his most kind of deeply affecting film, in my opinion. And it's interesting that we're treating them as one film because there is a very clear divide between them in terms of, not just in terms of like genre and sort of thrust, but the first film is the one where the majority of the violence happens, the majority of the stylistic flourishes happen, and the second film is much more interested in these characters talking to each other. It's a bloody revenge film taken as a whole that ends with like a half-hour discursive conversation on like the nature of death, the nature of Superman, and the relationship that the bride and Bill have. And I think that's really special and fantastic. I think this is his most like coherent and accomplished film. It's very technically accomplished. He's very much on point throughout. And I love, the many different ways you can read it. You can look at each kind of chapter of the movie as a different type of film, whether that's a samurai story or a Western or whatever. You can look at each chapter as a different sort of identity that this woman takes on as she tries to rebuild herself after the trauma of, being shot and her baby being taken away. You can look at it as there's a really fascinating article that I love that reads the whole film as like a Buddhist parable, where each opponent that she faces is like a mental sin that she has to cut out of herself in order to become a whole person. It's just a really surprisingly deep movie that I don't think a lot of people read into as much, because a lot of people kind of reach the level of like, oh, there's a really bloody samurai battle and she pulls her eye out, and the second one is just boring because they're just talking, and then Tarantino doesn't help because he doesn't really talk about like the meaning of his films very much. But I think it's actually really deep and also really satisfying on an emotional level. So I think this is kind of the total package, and it's probably my favorite Tarantino film.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask you, since this film made your top 10 for the 21st century. So you think, even going back from his even older films, this is the ones you found to be your favorite of all of his?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was always that way, but I think it's definitely like solidified itself the more I've rewatched it, and the more that the soundtrack is intimately familiar to me, and just like I love this film. I love watching this movie. I love all the little weird asides that he throws in, and all the fun things that he's doing, and all the serious stuff that he's doing, and it's just great. I tear up at the end. It's fantastic.
All right, Amy, what do you want to add to your love of Kill Bill?
It's actually not my favorite of Tarantino's work, but it's such a work of just massive scale and directorial control. Like, he knows exactly what he wants in every scene, and he gets it. Mm-hmm. And the film has a lot of different tone and substance to juggle, and just in and out of several genres. I mean, like, he's samurai films, kung fu films, westerns, like, intimate character studies, over-the-shoulder conversation films. It's so many different things at different times, and it, can go anywhere from just like deadly human and serious all the way to like super high camp. And it works. Like, nothing like that should work. And I can't really even think of anything to compare it to that works on that level. But it does. And I think it's Uma Thurman's best performance, especially in what became the second film.
And David Carradine is fantastic.
Right. I mean, he's just, Tarantino pulls these performances out of people that you just didn't know they had that in them. And he seems to do that pretty regularly. I mean, he did it with John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, and Pam Grier and Jackie Brown. He just, he's kind of a magician. I said a long time ago that he's the closest thing we have in film to alchemy. That he just takes stuff that shouldn't work and the math never adds up, and spins it into gold every time.
I like that.
And I mean, there's I can't figure out his process. When he talks, he sounds like an idiot. His handwriting is that of a child.
He can't spell, that's for sure.
Right. I mean, like, he's got just so many weird tics, but somehow every time it just coalesces into something brilliant.
What is your favorite Tarantino? Since this one isn't it?
It's probably Inglourious Basterds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll save that then.
Okay. Yeah, it's on the list. But no, Kill Bill's up there. I only have one film of his that I'm really not high on, and that's Death Proof.
Well, Caillou's about the only person who likes Death Proof, so you're not alone.
I love Death Proof. Okay. Everybody's wrong about that movie.
Well, I'm the outlier here. I don't know. There are a lot of there are parts of Kill Bill in all of it in its totality that are amazing. And just this film never, to me, came together in a way that worked. I don't know. It just it definitely never felt like it had a lot of really good parts, but I never really liked the sum as much. I never like the stuff you're all saying you felt happen. I just never felt that. It always just felt more jumbled to me. There is great performances in it, like there are fights that are really great. There's a lot in this movie that makes me that I've always kind of wondered why I don't like it more, because there's so much this various stuff in it that I love, like samurai films, kung fu movies, galore. There's even a sequence in which it becomes a comic for a little bit that's awesome. I mean,
it's there's that whole anime sequence.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff in there that I do like. I just, I mean, with all that said, I don't think this is a bad. I don't find these movies to be bad. I think they're pretty. I think they're really good. I just don't think they just didn't make my top 100 list. Though I would say, unlike some other ones, it wasn't particularly close. Like they were on my, they were on like my list of movies. I'm like, yeah, these are great movies I've watched the 21st century, but it wasn't one I really heavily considered putting on there. Because I mean, in general, this kind of falls to the fact that, I'm not necessarily as huge a Tarantino fan as most people are. I like some of his newer stuff, and I like Pulp Fiction, but it's kind of everything between is kind of hit or miss for me. So, this just didn't quite work for me as well as it did for you guys, and it's just why it's on the list. But it doesn't particularly matter because, I mean, I'll vote no because I'm just going to be Caillou and vote no on everything, and Caillou's going to vote yes because this is his top 10. I'm going to assume.
Yeah.
And Amy, I presume, is going to keep her vote as yes.
Yes. And there's a really interesting tidbit. You two probably know this, but where they split the movie on release, that last scene in the first half wasn't originally shot. And the big reveal, I don't know if we can spoil a 10-year-old movie at this point, but the reveal at the end that the baby is still, alive and well, was supposed to only come at the very end. It was supposed to be the same gut punch for the audience as it was for Beatrix.
I think it's great though. I think that's a very smart decision that he made. Because
I think it did also help allow for a more clean end. So.
Yeah, it's a very great punch to end what would otherwise be a little shapeless of an ending to that movie. And then it just kind of hangs over the rest of the film to the point where I think by the end of that movie, you've forgotten about it.
Yeah. And I wonder, cause I don't know where they would have cut the film otherwise, because they actually had to go back and shoot that scene. That scene wasn't even written.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but I think they also shot the scene where she does her list and does her kind of voiceover at the end, with the little clips of the preview of the next film was also not in the original script.
Possibly, I will say that.
Well, he never intended to be two films, so that makes sense.
Yeah. I will say that the other reason, especially kind of as a whole, that I always have enjoyed the first half of that than the second half. Second half to me is where I felt, even though that's when things got deeper, I don't know. That's where I guess the parts that I rubbed me wrong about Tarantino or where it rubbed me wrong the most, since the first one is mainly just because the first one is much more the samurai and even more so than the second one comparatively. So, but yes, now we will go on to a film that is on my list and is quite high on my list. There's also an Amy's list, and this is probably where Caillou's going to do everything he's coward just to hurt me. So, and that is Pan's Labyrinth. Pan's Labyrinth is a film in my top 10 list. It might very well be the top film for me, at least, of the 21st century.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just love this movie. I think that this is the one movie in which Del Toro, we kind of, in which Del Toro, I think, actually was able to roughly keep, he actually had a script and story through line they could actually somewhat keep to. I'm not going to say it's perfect because I don't think he's capable of doing that perfectly, but he did it in a way that I think still worked really well. The film is gorgeous. We kind of, we've alluded to the fact of compelling villains. I found the villain of that movie to be one of the more compelling villains I've seen because of how he functioned on both a personal and grander thematic level. The overall message of the movie I felt really fit in terms of how it made the ideas of a fantasy world, like what that can mean, work, and the morality of how it could play. I enjoy just like the visuals of the movie were just very different than things I had seen at that point. I felt it really helped push across some ideas you could really do with dark fantasy in ways that, in ways that America kind of has stopped. I mean, we've tried to catch back up now because we're more so in television, but it was definitely one of the ones I really felt was pushing it forward. It helped push, of course, the genre quite a bit. And it's just one of those movies that I could watch all the time. It's gorgeously set. The costuming in that movie is great. The elegant production design is absolutely amazing, and it just has like imagery in that movie that just sticks with me above pretty much almost anything else I've seen. Amy, what would you like to add, I guess, to why it made your list?
I agree very much with you that on both that Del Toro has some severe issues with story cohesion, but also that this is his most cohesive. And that's why I agree with you that the villain in this was just completely frightening. Certainly, through the eyes of a 6 or 7 year old girl, but just his brutality, and it wasn't overblown melodramatic brutality. It was just very visceral and very cold. And,
I do have to quickly add that just on the villain thing, there's probably maybe 3 times I've ever seen something happen. Like there's been villains in movies in which regardless of the fact what you're watching on screen is not real. Like I was legitimately somewhat happy when he died. Like there was it's a different visceral feeling of he got what he deserved, and in such a brutal way. And so few films have ever pulled that off. About the only one I can think of is in The Patriot, where Jason Isaacs' character gets killed by Mel Gibson, and not even to the same degree in this case. But
right, I mean, death was too good for this guy almost.
Right,
he's just awful on so many levels, but awful. Nothing ever, fantastically awful.
Yeah,
he seemed completely possible.
Yeah.
And it really allowed the story to connect with why, the young girl would escape into this fantasy world. I thought the fantasy stuff also kind of much, in Del Toro's way, didn't connect all the dots completely, and relied a lot more on tone and visuals to get his through line across than anything actually shown or stated. But this is probably the one instance where that really works okay, because the visuals are just so great and so new. It's not stuff that we've seen before, and he didn't want to show anything that anybody had seen before. It was, all from his head and all very strange and novel.
Yeah.
I don't like to put a movie on the list just because of its technical proficiency, but the art direction here was spectacular, and it tied into the story well. Something where Crimson Peak, I think, maybe the visuals in Crimson Peak are possibly more technically proficient than this film, but the story is such a mess.
Yeah, the Crimson Peak visuals probably have a little, because he has more technology to work with.
Right.
The production, the pure production design, it's a little more interesting. Can I compare the house towards this case, just various set designs they have set up.
Right. But no, if we're going to have any Del Toro film on the list, I want it to be this one.
Well, that's actually a good segue towards one of the reasons why I know Caillou doesn't want this on the list. So Caillou, go ahead.
I have kind of disliked this movie in a lot of ways since I saw it. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's a good movie that I think is held back by some complaints that I have that may or may not be esoteric. Specifically, I think that the problem movie is the fantasy stuff. I don't think it is coherent. I think it's arbitrary what she goes through, and I also think the film tries to have it both ways, where it tries to say, well, it's okay that it's kind of arbitrary because, you know, it's not real and she's just escaping to this fantasy dream world because real life is full of, you know, fascism and awfulness. But at the same time, the film makes clear at several points that it is not a dream and that it's literally happening. So I think the film kind of tries to have its cake and eat it too on that. And I think that a better the fantasy could have been done better for that movie. I also think that I also have a little bit of grudge against it because it took the cinematography Oscar from Children Men, which I think deserved it more. But the third argument here is that, like, I agree with you guys that Del Toro is a problematic filmmaker. He has a great sense of style, and he certainly has some unique interests in the filmmaking world, and he's often hamstrung by, like, just bad scripts and just broken movies. However, he has, like, Pan's Labyrinth is kind of a companion piece to an earlier film he did, whose name has now escaped me because I'm tired. Let me look it up. Devil's Background. Thank you. No, Devil's Background. Chronos is also really good, and I encourage people to watch Chronos. But Pan's Labyrinth is actually a kind of companion piece to an earlier film he did called Devil's Backbone, which is sort of the male equivalent of this more female-centric movie. It's about some kids during the Spanish Civil War who are at a haunted boarding school. And I think that film is both more coherent and uses the supernatural element to greater effect without running into the problems I have here. So my response to, like, Pan's Labyrinth is like, well, go watch this other one, which is trying to do a lot of the same things and doing it better, in my opinion. Even if it's not quite as visually lush. I think it's a better movie. So, like, but I at this point, I do not feel like any joy in opposing this movie, because I'm just not in a troll mood right now, I guess. So I'm still gonna no, but I'm not gonna, like, mock David for it. I respect his love for it.
I will quickly say that obviously the Devil's Backbone thing doesn't, like, obviously it doesn't preclude both them being on the list. So I've always found that to be, whether or not whether or not my assumption has always been, you might be like, well, I guess that just means my two favorite movies will be Del Toro movies instead of my one.
I do find it weird. I didn't know this was, like, your favorite movie of the 21st century, and I do find it weird in that instance you did not like that you have yet to run out and watch this other one that is similar, even if you don't know yet whether you like it as much.
My ability to watch movies at times gets weird. I get caught up watching current films to try and, like, do things like write about them for the blog. It happens. I don't know what to tell you. Look, there's everyone has blind spots that make no sense. This is obviously one of them in which I don't really have a real defense as to why I haven't watched Devil's Backbone.
Hold on a second.
Well, there's a plane anyhow, so that may have been ruined. So we'll just go with it. But
let me know when I can talk.
Go ahead.
To your point about them both being on the list, although I think Devil's Backbone is better, that also didn't make my list just because, like, it's not, it's not my top 100 favorite movies. It's really good, but I don't, like, love it as on a personal level. And, plus, just foreign films, down with foreigners.
I mean, that's fair. I was just pointing out the fact that obviously that doesn't automatically preclude. And and then the other one, obviously, I'm not going to get into the deeper discussion we've had many a times off podcasts about how the fantasy works, but I never had those issues of thinking of like whether or not it was trying to have its cake, because I felt that it layered enough and the ending made it pretty clear about its viewpoint on whether it was real or not, and they were just trying to keep it just abstract enough and, like, unclear enough just so you weren't entirely sure the entire movie. But I felt the end was pretty clear. And that, to me, kind of fixed a lot of my issues with the fantasy aspects. Anyhow, I obviously vote yes. Amy, I guess, did you have anything else to add? And did Caillou change your mind through his half-hearted argument?
Well, and the thing is, I don't disagree with his argument.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Del Toro is a problematic filmmaker. He's someone that, this really, I feel like I should like his movies a lot more than I do. So I don't think my opinion has changed because it was nothing I hadn't already thought of myself while watching it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to go to the mattresses for this movie. It's still got its problems, but I think it deserves to be on there.
Right. Fair enough. And I will also agree that yes, as someone who loves this movie, to try to say that means I've given a blanket pass to Del Toro's other movies, that's definitely not true.
I'm not sure there's any Del Toro movie I would put on this list. I think the closest one is probably Pacific Rim, because its deep flaws are, in my opinion, outweighed by like the heights that it does achieve and the things it's trying to do. But I probably wouldn't put any of his movies on this list because I think he's never really made like a full unalloyed masterpiece, at least not in the 21st century.
I mean, Pacific Rim, would probably be one of the things to make one of my favorite film lists. But yeah, there are issues with it that even I, as much as I actually like that movie, couldn't put it on this list.
Yeah, and Pacific Rim might be my least favorite of his films.
Really, worse than the last one because you hated that one.
Crimson Peak.
Yeah.
I mean, Crimson Peak just frustrated me throughout the whole thing. Just because, he just kind of zigs where you're supposed to zag, and sometimes that's subversive, but just doing it for its own sake is, there's no coherence behind that.
That last 20 minutes, though.
And I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if I agree with that. I mean, it just seems to really go off the rails early and then just kind of keep going off the rails. And I definitely didn't think it stuck any kind of landing. It just gets more and more incoherent as it goes on.
Well, it doesn't help that Guillermo del Toro has decided that he's just a real big fan of Charlie Hunnam and keeps putting him in his movies, which is disappointing for lots of reasons.
I do think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it looks like that whole for me that whole last 30 minutes or so never even had a script. It was just like a storyboard, and they're like, we'll just shoot it and figure it out, and we'll say some words and it'll make sense and we'll get it in post. And no, they did not. They did not get it in post.
I mean, I'll agree. All the parts that work about that scene is Jessica Chastain herself. It's not. I mean, I presume Del Toro had some help directing wise, but yes, I'm not going to pretend that there was no, it was her. No, it's just it was her.
Well, and they played the big reveal about the relationship between Chastain and Tom Hiddleston it's like this earth-shattering thing, and it's basically telegraphed from the first time they're together, and reiterated over and over again. And by the time they get to it, it's just yes, I know, get to the point. Everyone in this theater knows what's going on and has known for a while.
I do think any Del Toro fan should check out Cronos, which is beyond this list because it's 1993, but it is a really good movie.
Didn't Del Toro do Mimic?
Yeah, but I haven't seen that one.
It's really awful.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like his heart is in it at all. I mean, it's just 90 minutes of people that are also roaches.
Well, since we're going through all his movies, Hellboy is...
This should be enough of even as a comprehensive discussion of Guillermo del Toro that we'll mostly cover, I think. I think he'll be brought up again in some way as a producer later on, but I believe this will cover all we'll actually talk about for the most part, Del Toro, for the entirety of these podcasts. So let's just move along, and we will go on to. It's a good thing you mentioned, Caillou, about your anger towards Pan's Labyrinth being based on it beating Children's Men for best cinematography, because that is in fact the next film we're going to talk about, which is one that both Caillou and Amy voted for, and I did not. This film also was on Caillou's top 10 list, so I will let Caillou talk about it first because he does love this movie.
I love this movie so much. There are certain movies whose beyond their story, the way that they the way that they portray that story is just electric from beginning to end, and that's the feeling I get here. It's Cuarón and his use of long takes is like that. This is the first time I saw that from him, and I think it's more interesting here than Gravity, because in Gravity he had, to a certain aspect, he had like total control, whereas in this movie he's working around real locations and non-digital effects, and like there's the phenomenal car chase sequence where they had to build like a car that could come apart and move as the camera shifted around through it. So like from a technical level, and in terms of the way that the film aligns all of our traditional tools of cinema to tell a very focused and detailed story, I think that's phenomenal. I think on top of that, it's a film that's gotten more relevant every year because it looks at sort of this near future dystopia where a lot of the world has kind of fallen away, but as the one of the advertisements say, Britain soldiers on, but in a way that features sort of concentration camps for immigrants, that features surveillance and kind of the militarization of the government, and we see a lot of those nasty trends continuing today in the UK and as well as in America. That I think it was partly a response to the Bush years as well. So there's that aspect of it, and it tells kind of a very interesting sci-fi story about, okay, here's a world that has lost hope because no one can have children anymore, and what happens when a child does emerge. So there's like a Christ parallel you can kind of take or leave, but it speaks to kind of the human need for something to live for. The main character is such like a sad sack who early on in the film like wakes up to his television advertising a suicide pill sponsored by the government. So he wakes up, and his TV is telling him to kill himself, and he has to kind of find his way back to this earlier person that he was, who cared about things and fought back against tyranny and in favor of the future. It's just like it's doing so many things and so virtuous with such virtuosity that it just feels like this amazing juggling act that I always love rewatching.
All right, Amy, do you have anything different to say in Caillou, or things you want to extrapolate upon from what he said?
So much of my love for this film is based on Emmanuel Lubezki's photography.
Yeah.
I mean, this was actually not like the start of his career, because he'd actually been working a good while just kind of flying under the radar, but this is the film that really like put him front and center. And I mean, Caillou is right, he should have won the Oscar for this one.
Yeah.
But no, it's a gorgeous film to look at, and the way that he sells a lot of the scenes visually and allows the camera to assist the narrative. He's not, just getting coverage. He's telling the story. I mean, so many, even from early on, like the story is being told through information gleaned visually from, long tracking shots or, crane shots that turn into tracking shots. And just not only, shows a lot of technical flourish, but shows he understands why, why you can use the camera and how you can use the camera to enhance the story. I find it somewhat frustrating that he's also the DP on The Revenant, which I thought was like the exact antithesis of that kind of approach to filmmaking. But hey, whatever.
Well, it's funny because The Revenant also involves this kind of long take cinema, but excepting the battle scene at the beginning of the movie, like it fills those long takes with fucking nothing. Whereas like one of the things that makes Children of Men so great is that it's not just a long take, it's a long take where things are happening, people are moving, there's an arrangement of choreography between all the elements of the film that keeps the pace and keeps moving from like sort of setup to setup within the long shot that really sustains your interest and makes it a really like fun experience.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's a great academic film. It's again one of those films that will come up in film school time and again um, for the way it has technical achievement. And sadly, this I think was like probably one of the two high water marks of Clive Owen's career. Who I mean, he just seemed like someone who should have had a bigger career.
The other one was obviously Shoot 'Em Up, right?
Actually, no, it was not Shoot 'Em Up. But that's a terrible choice on your part. Actually,
he's done. I would say he's done more than two good movies. He's Closer comes to mind, as does the one he did early in his career, Croupier. Croupier.
He's really good in his Born. The one small part he has in Born, he's really good in. He doesn't do much, but he's pretty awesome in that. Like,
I mean,
he takes like a nothing role and invests it with some actual like emotion, which is great.
And I hear, and I haven't watched any episodes, and I really want to, and it's just time and everything. But I hear the Nick is fantastic, and he's fantastic in it. He plays the main character. I think it's on Showtime or something.
Yeah, that's.
But
that's
no, I mean,
Soderbergh's TV show. I haven't gotten to that either.
Yeah. I mean, sounds like it should be pretty amazing. But he did Closer, and then the next year he'd shot Children of Men. Oh, and he did Inside Man in between that.
Oh God, I hate that movie.
And Sin City. So I mean, like he was in some high-profile movies that did really well, that people really liked him in.
Yeah. And
it's not like he hasn't worked since then. He's just kind of disappeared. He'll show up and stuff, but no one cares. I mean, this is a guy that, for the longest time was being, bandied around as the next James Bond, and now he's just meh.
He has a really good energy in this, I think, because of the way that he and the film sell the arc of him like being, fairly like cynical and dispassionate, and then slowly finding himself kind of getting involved against his will until he's being very sincere about caring deeply about what happens next.
I will just go ahead and say that, this is probably one of the films that actually was on my list at one point. It only got knocked off because a couple of other films I'd realized I'd forgotten about.
Because you split the Lord of the Rings. That's what happened. I'm just going to rail at you for that original decision.
It wasn't one. It was off by like 4 or 5. So no.
Okay. All right.
At first, it looked like it was just going to be one. So then you could have made that argument. But I stand by splitting Lord of the Rings. So that's a different argument you can have with me when our list is finished and you rail about the fact that this costs a movie randomly off your list. Obviously, just your movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like it as much as either of you do. I will say that. Partially because I do. Mostly why I had it on my list was I felt it did a lot of really like visually just did things that a lot of films hadn't done. Though even I will admit that even that I was somewhat comparatively underwhelmed to, which is just a somewhat thing of by the time I probably got around to watching it, I'd been told this is like this revolutionary filmmaking thing, and so it's not entirely the film's fault. I will also say this is probably one of films that like I know at some point I'd rewatch. This is definitely one of them, just to kind of get a better look at it. But in general, I mean, my biggest problem with the movie is while I thought the visuals were great, I never felt much of a connection to the story that was happening on screen. It felt very much like this really good visual thing that was happening in a like very thin story that works on some levels because like both Cuarón and Levitsky are really good at creating things that make the visuals actually connect to what's happening, but it's just I never was able to get that invested in it. It just kind of, it just felt like the movies kind of went along showing me different stuff. And I don't necessarily mind rewarding some films, like you said, for films that do things purely more than just story-wise, but there has to be something there, and it just wasn't enough for me to like it as much as most people seem to. At the same time, I'm still a really good movie and did a lot of really important stuff. I'm not quite as outraged. Like I think there are far worse times in Levitsky's career where he got snubbed. And now he's won 3 straight, so he's fine. He's doing fine. So
he's doing fine now. Really. At the time, it was very angering.
Well, yeah, but I mean that was part of the thing. Like it was definitely one of them. But like I'm just saying, like I was far more annoyed when he lost the Tree of Life. Us going against him that year was far worse. whereas at least I understand why Pan's Labyrinth beat it. I also don't agree with that decision, probably. Oh, plane. Did you have a joke that you wanted to say while the plane was going?
No, I wanted to chime in real quick with something about the cinematography Oscar.
Well, let me finish real fast and then you can do that.
Okay.
Still waiting on the plane.
I'm just letting it go a little bit further away and making sure this isn't one of those tricky ones where I think it's a plane leaving, but it's actually a plane coming, because this happens sometimes during this point.
I feel really bad. I completely forgot about Closer when I was making the list. Just completely forgot.
Oh, really? It's
I did.
Is it on my list?
It makes you feel better. I did too. I had to actually think when he brought it up. I was like, oh crap! I had to think about it, and it didn't quite make my list. But yeah, I completely forgot. There was 3 films I completely forgot about. And that was one of them.
That's one of the movies that I just think of because I've rewatched a few times because it's one of the movies I can watch while working because it's all dialogue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
a couple of scenes with Natalie Portman. Yeah, it's all dialogue. No, I meant like the way they actually do colors in that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'm sure there are several films on my list that I could take off in favor for that one.
Well, you'll have your chance, literally, because it's on my list and we're going to talk about it. So you can literally just vote one of your own films down in favor of it.
Well, that's not how that process.
Like I did. That's what I did with Gravity. So
yeah, but I was just not how that process is going to work.
Well, whatever.
That's not how you do it. But you can just vote for it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can't talk me into downvoting X-Men. We're done on that one.
Okay.
Enshrined. Classic.
From a snub perspective, I actually probably had not as much of an issue with the Children of Men snub, just because I felt there were times in the past where times, I guess, going forward that was far worse. And I actually think Pan's Labyrinth, I understand why Pan's Labyrinth beat it. I also, like you, don't think that was the correct choice, but at least I understood the reasoning behind it. And the cinematography on Pan's Labyrinth is actually quite good. So that's, it's, to me, it wasn't as much of a travesty as some of the other losses.
Well, the thing is just not, you don't get a film whose cinematography is technically in advance for the medium every year. And to me, that was Pan's Labyrinth was very good conventional cinematography versus this film that was full of these very technically complex long takes and stuff they had to invent machines for, and it seemed to me to be pushing forward the medium, and that was kind of the argument between the two. And then that year was also made more angering by the fact that was also the year of The Prestige, which I argue has even better conventional cinematography than Pan's Labyrinth. So I was just angry all around.
Well, I mean, I think since you brought up that fact, because I agree that I felt this film pushed a lot of things forward. I think part of what hurt it for me a little bit was because it felt more like, oh, wow, you did all this stuff. I felt like since they were having to invent and do a lot of stuff that they weren't as skilled with it as, let's say, if he made Children of Men now, just hypothetically. I like the stuff I think he could do, and even I think comparatively the stuff he could do by pushing it forward would even be more comparatively better for numerous reasons. To me there was just sloppiness at times to it that kind of hurt it for me compared to some stuff enough to where that's why I wasn't as outraged, and that's also why I didn't think the technology was quite enough for me to put it on my list. At that said, this film being on the list isn't really, I don't really have that big of a problem with it. Unlike some other films in which I have a somewhat different opinion than other people on, let's say No Country for Old Men, I don't really have any real issues with this movie. It just didn't quite make my list, and that's what happens.
So you're voting yes, right?
No, I'm still voting no because there's a reason it wasn't on my list. I'm just acknowledging that when it makes this list, I'm not really that angry about it because whatever. But presumably, as always, I'm almost at the point now where I'm just not even going to ask Caillou anymore if the movie he voted for is actually being changed because it's not going to happen. And,
okay, this is on my top 10 list. Okay, I'm not going to change.
No. But especially in this case, you're obviously not. But I mean, in general, I'm almost at this point. But yes, obviously, you're not going to take your top 10 movie off the list. Amy, I assume you're also still good on this movie.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep moving along to an animated movie that is on both Caillou's and my list, and that is Pixar's Finding Nemo.
Amy, are you making noise? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm making noise. I'm sorry.
Don't
Do
do
you
that.
want me to read you the intro?
Yeah, please. Or if you need to like make noise, and then we'll start it.
Yeah, I was just moving my chair.
Okay.
You good?
I'm good.
Okay.
We will now move on to an animated film that was on Caillou's and my list, and that is Pixar's Finding Nemo. I believe you said before, Caillou, that you think this is probably your favorite Pixar film, so I'll let you kind of start with this.
I don't know if it's my favorite. It is, I think, the best.
Fair enough. My point is,
yeah.
you had it as the top of your of some lists for Pixar.
Yes. Yes. I admire this film very much and enjoy it a lot. I think that this film, Pixar is great, obviously, and Pixar had probably like one of the best runs of any studio in cinema history. For its first, like, I don't even know how many, was it like 8 films or something?
Basically everything except for basically Cars and whatever you want to argue with The Bug's Life.
Like until it hit, like, yeah. So I don't like A Bug's Life and I don't like Cars. Everything in between that is like one masterpiece after another, and one masterpiece after another that is totally inventive and different from every other film that they made, which I think is incredible, and it's a testament to.
The point you probably would want to say maybe it changes probably around like what, Brave? Is that what we'd say?
Well, Cars was before Brave, so I think.
Yeah,
Cars
but I mean, there were films after Cars. I think most people still consider.
I don't know. Maybe I'd have to look it up, and I'm being lazy right now. What I was saying was that I think that pretty amazing run is a testament to the brain trust that they had over there, and the fact that they had so many talented filmmakers who would hang out and kind of give advice in each other's movies, and the fact that Pixar is dedicated to like reworking stuff until it's right, like completely starting over Toy Story 2 from scratch after getting it from Disney. But anyway, so this film is an Andrew Stanton film, and it's I think one of the most beautiful of all their movies, because it applies their immense technical genius at computer animation to a very beautiful set of imagery, which is all these underwater scenes. There's all the way that the light comes through the water, the way that the water moves, the plants back and forth, and the way that the fish move. It's a really gorgeous movie. And then on top of that, I think it's a very relatable movie, because it's basically, it's about a father who is afraid to let his son go off and kind of, live his life as he's, starting school. It's about a son who wants to grow up and be independent and has to find his own courage in order to do so. The whole film is, I think, the best because it's so coherent around those themes. Every new person Marlon meets on his journey to find his son offers a different vision of sort of freedom and constraint. From the sharks who are self-constrained as sort of like Fish Eaters Anonymous, to the very free-living turtles, to the other side of the story, which is Nemo in the tank with the people who are sort of like it's sort of a prison break movie, and they've sort of become institutionalized to their tiny little world, and he sort of shows them a reason to change that. So I think it feels really good. The Thomas Newman score is one of his best. It's just, it's the whole package, I think, and that's why it definitely deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, I watched this one. This is one of the few Pixar films I didn't watch when it first came out. In fact, I watched it much, much later. May or may not have been earlier this year. But I agree with most of what you said, so I don't really want to dwell too much on this. This is probably arguably the prettiest of the Pixar films, even now. Just like design, things they did. There's some that I might find, I might personally like Inside Out's look a little bit better. Pure just animation and like construction, I would actually agree probably is Finding Nemo. Just the colors, the way it goes against it, and then just the story that goes around it in general. It's, it's one of those films that even after being told how emotional it could be, it still gets to you. Like after you watch it, it's like you said, it's a very classic story, and it just worked really well for me. And I'm a big lover of Pixar and animated films in general, and this was definitely an example of one that showed kind of like things that could be done with animation that can't necessarily be done as well live action. Even just this company I did, obviously they're fish.
Yeah.
Just how they can show the ocean. Hold on, playing. I remember this, Burbank. I mean, I won't do anything about it, but I remember this. Even obviously with this kind of effect, obviously they're fish, so clearly that makes a difference. But I mean, just like the way they showed the ocean is just like ways you can do that, and animation can push it. And I felt this is one of the ones that helped push, to do stuff to kind of push forward what you can do with animation. Andrew Stanton is very, very good as long as he's not having to deal with live action things that involve John Carter. And this I think was a great, it was also a really good example of kind of like a movie that really benefited from the Pixar Brain Trust, because that was definitely when it came out during the key period where everyone was just kind of working together all the time. Amy, this film didn't make your list, so I guess explain why you hate Nemo so much.
I'm dead serious when I say I am just not a big Disney fan. I don't like their house style. I don't like the way that, especially over the last couple of decades, they've just gotten very toothless with their films in a way their older animated features lack. And I just kind of find the Pixar films very homogenous at this point. They're obviously very well put together and cutting edge graphically, but it's all the same in-house design. And the messages are always, not very challenging, and they're fairly safe. Even if they are, good messages and, laudable, important messages. It just seems that, Disney and Pixar both are very okay with being kind of gummy. And I generally don't enjoy their work. I keep going to them thinking, they always deserve a fair shot. But no, I just generally don't like them. The only Pixar film that I'm really crazy about is Ratatouille.
Which we will get to later on. We're discussing this.
Which I disagree with that argument. I don't think Finding Nemo is the most challenging film, but I don't think Ratatouille is the most challenging film either. I think that Pixar, Up and WALL-E, and to a certain extent The Incredibles are all films that offer a more unique, and challenging message for people. So I think that you're painting Pixar with a broad brush, especially Pixar is not Disney; they're distinct.
Well, especially when Finding Nemo was made. Now it's a little more questionable, but that was before Pixar and Disney had actually filmed.
Yeah, I know John Lasseter is the head of Disney Animation. So,
well, yeah, they did conquer them, but I mean,
yes, that was after the.
When you're talking on the scale of the past few decades of Disney, then very little of that is actually Pixar's Disney.
Yeah, that merger happened after the massive failure that was Chicken Little, when Disney thought they could out Pixar and failed miserably. And so that's kind of what led to the Pixar taking over everything too. But I will say this, I don't think it happened as early as you do, but the kind of things you're talking about, your concerns with Pixar and Disney in general, I definitely think have started to sprout up now. Especially in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. And I think one of the reasons Pixar's not found themselves kind of struggling a little bit is that since they're still kind of doing somewhat similar stuff, if they just are off a little bit, it's just really noticeable. Finding Nemo to me though didn't have most of these issues, and I think it also kind of has to be fair to say that Finding Nemo, when it was made, the house style was still fairly that was pretty. Finding Nemo was relatively early in Pixar's giant run. And I wouldn't necessarily say when you look at it now, it kind of pushed it forward in ways that, the style hadn't been quite as concrete at that point. So,
I think this movie did a lot to establish a lot of their character designs going forward.
And just the fact to me that it holds up, even like I said, watching it now, and I still probably argue it's like the prettiest one. Like I think it does kind of stand out in that way. But you know, not all movies don't resonate with people, or like the sense, and you know, I certainly can understand that. As a person who's currently had these complaints or these ideas running with Disney and Pixar in more recent years, I certainly can understand someone who's had it for much longer, to some degree.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to sound like an old curmudgeon because you know, one, I'm not super old, and two, I mean, the movies that I do prefer are, you know, I do think are more interesting and challenging, or you know, came out long before I was born. Some of them. I don't know. It just seems like films from a few generations past felt much more comfortable exploring more adult themes or more challenging themes in works meant for children. And Disney especially has defanged themselves from that.
Well, there'll be many other animated films we'll have discussed throughout this, so this will be an interesting discussion to keep having. And in fact, I might even have it with the other 2 animated films that are on even today's talking about discussion points. So for now, I presume, Amy, you will not be changing your vote.
No, I'm sorry.
I am not changing mine. I don't know why I bother asking Caillou, but I assume you aren't changing yours.
I'm still yes.
Yep. Okay.
Look, I'm receptive to arguments, but when somebody's argument is it just didn't work for me, that's not going to change my mind because it did work for me.
I wasn't actually sighing for this. I was sighing because of the mental energy I'm about to have to expend that I'm not entirely thrilled with. Because the next film is Spike Jonze's Where the Wild Things Are. And Amy and Caillou both put it on their lists. I did not. And this is going to be fun. Totally fun. So, Amy, why don't you go ahead and start first, since you know you had, after talking about a film you weren't entirely thrilled with presumably one you are thrilled with since it made your list.
All right. You know, there's nothing I take a perverse joy in more than a really good bait and switch. You know.
So let me explain why I hate Where the Wild Things Are.
That would be a pretty great segue.
That'd be the greatest con I've ever seen in my life, because you would have trolled Caillou on levels I can't even express.
I'll have to do that one day. I'll figure that out. I'll find a way.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, very understandably and probably very easy from a marketing standpoint, the film was sold as this kind of like children's adventure film. And, you know, I mean, almost everybody's familiar with the story, which is, you know, paper thin. I don't know if that book has 10 whole pages in it. And I don't know if it has 20 whole words in it. I mean, it's just not much going on there. And Spike Jonze manages to turn something that almost every other person would have been, you know, a straightforward kind of lowbrow children's effort into something very poignant. And, you know, there's a lot of melancholy. And condemnation of a child's choices and behavior, and it's not all, you know, just, oh, you're an amazing, wonderful child and life is gorgeous and just embrace life, la la la. No, it's like, hey, kid, you're a little old to be such a dick, and you need to figure this shit out because you're kind of an asshole. And I mean, that's just a really interesting message to go with for a movie that is ostensibly aimed at children, but not really. And I heard a great description of this movie once. It's a movie about being a child, but it's not a movie for children. Which is really interesting because it's, you know, full of Muppets and shit. But no, I love it. I mean, I love it when also when people kind of get swindled into going to see something a lot more highbrow than they're expecting. Kind of like the whole Drive scenario where people were upset they didn't get a Fast and Furious knockoff.
Or a Tree of Life where people hope they're seeing a normal Brad Pitt movie.
Right.
I will agree that I do kind of get a perverse joy out of that. I guess it's the inner pretentious film student in me. But, yeah. Caillou, would you like to, I guess, continue adding to the gushing praise for Where the Wild Things Are?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about specifics, but I agree with Amy that like a large part of why this film is so great is because it had the courage to take this approach with the material. You know, you can easily imagine the like, you know, the shitty DreamWorks version of this with like CGI monsters who were like bouncing around and making faces and like farting, and the kid is giggling, and you know they help him, you know, defeat the principal to, you know, show his mom what for, whatever. You know, there's a really, really awful movie that could have been made of this, and instead, we got this very, very heartfelt and sincere exploration of like what it means to be an unhappy kid. You know, you have all these characters that the film kind of turns into sort of aspects of his emotional reality. They're all exaggerated. You know, that there's his shame and his fear and you know his wild energy and so on that are like the things that are causing him problems in terms of his interactions with the people around him, and it sort of ends up teaching him, you know, it's one of those movies where the character gets what they ostensibly want and only later learns that they didn't, that they should want other things. So, you know, it's that, and at the same time, it's this beautifully gorgeous, wonderfully shot film that's kind of an ode to the friendship, the performance. I think Max Records is phenomenal in this movie, as the kid. And I also think the voice cast is great, especially James Gandolfini, who brings just like a sadness and a loneliness to his character that's very affecting. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, Spike Jonze is an amazing director, and one of the reasons is that he's able to do things that nobody else does, and he makes these fantastic choices, like the choice to have, you know, the characters not be computer generated, just like their either their eyes or their face, but either way, the bulk of them is a big, you know, monster costume that the kid is interacting with. And yeah, just look at this movie of like, you know, it all takes place outside. It's in these woods, you know, or it's on this beach, and he finds ways to make this kind of fantastical landscape be something very real that the kid is interacting with in a very real way. And it just really, it really gets to me. It makes me think about my childhood and all that. So I think it's a very excellent and original film, and there really is no, you know, kids film like this, or I guess a film for people who, you know, want to remember being kids.
That's all fair points. I'll
But
say that, well, look, there's a reason why I was like dismayed when talking about this. I never really understood. This may literally be the film I've never totally understood why I don't like more than any other movie in existence, because everything about this movie is the type of things I fucking like love. I love children's films that aren't really children's films or kind of deconstructions. I love you know, things that take like, they're like more like mood pieces. I love like things that really like treat kind of how they treat children is a little more like nuanced and adult and not just like with kids' gloves.
And puppets. You love puppets.
I love puppets. The visuals of this movie are great. Hold on, plane.
I will go back and just watch the trailer of this movie because that just fills me with so much like energy and joy.
And the trailer with Arcade Fire.
Yeah.
Did you want to say that on the podcast, or?
I'll cut it back in if I feel like it.
Okay, hold on. I was super excited to see this movie. The trailer had me very hyped for it. I love Spike Jonze. Just this movie to me doesn't work as well as it should. I think it's really, really slow and in a bad way, which, considering I'm a person who generally loves things that are deliberate and take their time, the fact that that bothers me is like a really big red flag. I just never found the emotional connection to be quite as deep as I felt it should have. I'll be honest, this may partially because of like, I wasn't as entirely surprised that like how they ultimately portrayed the kid is surprising, but I wasn't as entirely surprised of Hold on. Thought it was going to be a soft plane. I was wrong. Said it was one that literally flew directly over my house.
I just would have liked to have been in that pitch meeting for this movie.
I guess how the movie actually went didn't surprise me as much. I mean, how they ultimately portrayed the kid is a little different because they usually aren't willing to acknowledge kind of like unlikability that children can have in movies, like as a main character and things like that. But I guess to me, I mean, I understand there certainly is the really, really bad version of the movie. And I'm obviously much happier this version exists than that version, like the version where they just completely go in a different direction. But to me, I guess this type of movie to me was kind of what I always felt. If you were going to make Where the Wild Things Are properly, is what you would do. For whatever reason, I just felt like most of the stuff he did just felt like misfires. It didn't quite work as well as it did. It didn't feel paced well. It didn't connect as well as I think it should have. A lot of it, there's a lot of really cool things with like the puppets and the visuals and stuff, but I just didn't think there's a lot really to go with it. I don't hate this movie. I think it's a good movie. I just never really the hype for it to me never really fit. I think a lot of people really like the movie because, like they said, they are so surprised by how a kid's movie can be portrayed that they gave it extra credit when I don't know if it actually deserved the extra credit for that. I'm glad it did that, but just because it did that doesn't automatically mean if they don't do that stuff well, it deserves to be praised. And ultimately, it just didn't work. This isn't a film which despite this, I almost had on my list. It was definitely not on my list. This is also a film I will say, to be fair, that like Children of Men, I kind of would I need to rewatch at some point just to kind of see if any of this changes at all. But, that feeling, I've never left a movie so deflated comparatively compared to what the stuff in this movie. Just never have.
I do think it's slow, which I don't think is necessarily to the movie's credit. But I also think that's partially intentional because it's structurally it's meant to be the very end and the very beginning are this little short story, and then the middle is this free and unstructured space in all sense of the word for him to just kind of work through his emotional issues. So I think it's meant to be kind of meandering in that sense because he's just existing and feeling and changing the way he feels by virtue of existing and feeling those things for a while. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a way to impose a real story on that and still have that work.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the story thing because I agree. I think it was definitely intentioned. I think it just may be that for whatever reason, I just don't think Spike Jonze's style fit for this as well as he fit in terms of he knew the correct direction to take the story. Mm-hmm. But I just think now there are other directions that maybe could have done things on more individual levels that could have made that pop more and made the middle parts feel better than that did. And it's just, one of those weird things where I just don't think the movie works as well as them do. I mean, I have legitimate issues with it. I continue to be perplexed at these issues, but that's what they are.
Sometimes it happens. You think you're going to love something and then you don't. I thought I was going to love Dario Argento, and I keep trying for some reason, and I always am no, this just isn't good. It's not for me.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes there's just movies where even with directors you love, that specific movie doesn't work for you. Yeah. It's the one where you're just oh, no, keep it away from me. So that's why, obviously, those are good arguments both of you made. If and in principle, that movie you guys talk about is what I wish I had watched. Because that movie sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. Instead, I watched Where the Wild Things Are, which wasn't quite that movie. So unfortunately, I can't change my vote. But
well, that's fair. But you should go back and rewatch it sometime just to see if you feel any differently.
I feel like there's a good chance.
I probably should too. I feel like I need to see this again.
I feel like there's a good chance I'll probably like it more.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll like it enough to ever really jump it. But I will acknowledge there's a good chance that I would like it a little bit more if I watched it because just things how things are changed. Mm-hmm. Space. Maybe being older would actually help a little bit in this case. I actually think because a lot of that film is dealing with childhood and what that means, and that may hit more actually as you get more nostalgic. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Amy, I assume you will also be changing your vote?
So I will be changing my vote?
You will not be changing your vote.
No.
That was a bait and switch in the making there. Just trying to reverse psychology, Amy.
I said not.
Yeah.
I didn't say change your vote.
I didn't hear your nut either. I'm still voting yes for this.
Yeah, we know, Kevin.
You're not gonna rules lawyer me into switching a vote. Okay?
You know, every single vote that we've had, like one of the only, like I think only 2 people have changed the votes, and yet you shit on me all the time for being obvious about it.
No, that's because look, the rest of us didn't make the outward statement of like, well, now I've looked at my movies again, and I'm just going all in on them. Amy and I were smart enough never to actually admit that, even though we both thought it was true.
Let's move things along.
Okay. Well, because apparently we just have to keep talking about Quentin Tarantino. The next film we're going to talk about is Inglourious Basterds, which Caillou and Amy have on their list. And I do not, because I haven't seen it. I watched the first 3 minutes of it on a plane, and then my flight ended. So, yeah. That's probably why it's not on my list, presumably. But Amy, you said this, I think is what you said, is your favorite Tarantino movie. And
yes.
If I
ten.
believe it's on your top 10. So why don't you start us off?
Again, how have you not seen this movie? Oh my god.
Don't even try. It's just
weird things.
There's no getting him to watch things that are great.
But I watch a lot of things. Stop acting like this. Everyone has films they haven't watched.
Right, but now's the time when we get to shit on you for it. You can shit on us later.
No, I don't. But I principally don't agree with the concept of shitting upon people for not having seen things. There's a lot of things to watch.
Well, that's your fault for unilaterally disarming.
I'm just lamenting. It's like someone who said that they've never had grilled cheese sandwich or something.
Well, I mean, I lament somewhat too, if only because from what I've been told, all the things I've liked about the last 2 Tarantino films apparently were really seen. You saw a real big start of the genesis for them in this one, so that does make me sad.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last 3 Tarantino films have kind of been, that's his turn into important commentary films. Because I mean, his early filmography is kind of thin on overt political statement or sociological statements.
He's sort of having a sort of analog to Spielberg's career of moving from pop entertainments to more serious-minded historical works.
Well, and the only difference there, I would say, is that Tarantino's films are interesting and entertaining, and Spielberg just makes me sad.
No, that's
fired.
I'm talking about earlier in Spielberg's career. I'm talking about this is Tarantino's Schindler's List, and even though Tarantino's Schindler's List is still fundamentally ridiculous and full of explosions and shit, it is him taking a more serious approach to what he's talking about.
Yeah, and somehow Samuel L. Jackson's involved in the list. But no, I think even after this with Django and 8, I don't think he has made a film that manages to be both really outside the mold of what you expect this kind of film to be, as well as being thematically on point and building that point throughout the film of how we view our own morality through the lens of wartime. And it's a very self-referential film. I mean,
yeah.
The very final shot of the film is breaking the fourth wall. And a character talking about Tarantino basically in the first person. But wow, I mean, just it's such a smart and daring film, and it manages. I know Tarantino is kind of the master of people just sitting around talking and somehow being really fucking entertaining. But he has that one scene in the cellar bar in Germany where everybody except for David knows that scene. And just the way the tension just slowly ratchets and ratchets and ratchets, and then the same kind of thing at the fancy dining club with Melanie Laurent and what's his face, Disco Santa Claus. Called him on the Green Hornet. I'm sorry, but no, just a great film. A smart film with a lot of political statement and made much more coherently and with less camp involved than Django, and much more concisely than Hateful Eight, which were both films I enjoyed, but I think Inglourious Basterds is Tarantino's best film.
Right.
And I don't even think it's that close.
Fair enough. Caillou, what would you like to add? And this, I'm sure, will become a somewhat discussion of Tarantino as a whole, more so than just this movie.
I like Inglourious Basterds a lot, and I'm going to vote for it. It's not my favorite Tarantino, and I think like it has. Its main problem is that I think it's slightly less than some of its parts, and its parts are amazing. I mean, the opening scene alone, Tarantino believes is probably like the best scene he's ever written, and I don't think he's wrong. The way that it's like exquisitely directed, very classically, to ratchet up tension between this like humble French farmer and Christoph Waltz as this Jew hunting Nazi who is just going to talk to him very calmly and then very subtly and slowly sort of pressure him into folding and revealing whether he has Jews hidden on his property or not. I think it's a fantastic scene. I think there are a lot of amazing scenes in this movie. I think the themes are great. It really, the listeners can go all the way back to our very first podcast episode of Life in the Kraken to find an argument between me and Sam about this movie as it applies to Hateful Eight in terms of I think this movie is not just like a Jewish revenge story, but also a story about how like both sides of this war are human and inhuman in equal measure, or at least in comparable measure. There's a beautiful moment in this film where they're going to execute this Nazi soldier, and you feel for him because they're going to enjoy beating him to death as entertainment. But you also feel for them, and there's a moment where a yellow leaf like falls onto one of their sleeves, recalling the symbol that the Nazis made the Jews wear to show their Jewishness. I think the problem with the film is just that, like, Tarantino has this really terrible habit lately of writing like scripts much longer than the actual film is going to be, and then he has to go and cut kind of ruthlessly. And he's been doing that at least since Kill Bill. And this film, I think, shows the worst of it because it really is a bunch of like really great but sort of tenuously connected set pieces of different kind of interrogations surrounding this like wartime setting. So I think it actually is much less coherent than Django because Django is a very straightforward story from beginning to end, whereas this kind of jumps around in perspective and it doesn't really stick with the bastards as much as you think it might. And so yeah, I think it's slightly not his best, but still a really good movie that I'm going to vote for.
Okay, so
I never really thought about it that way, but it's really interesting. But yeah, the film is a series of interrogations.
Yes.
And I don't know how many there are. I mean, there could be like 8 or 9. And every little vignette has some measure of interrogation, except for like the second to last kind of set piece at the theater.
Yeah, well, even the theater, because there's that moment when they're in the lobby and he's like, he's like smirking and grilling them on their obviously like fake Italian, and they're like trying to bluff their way through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially I think the best part of the movie is probably, if not the opening scene, the long tavern build, where you have that great line about King Kong, and then it just like that's Tarantino like experimenting as he's been doing the past like 4 or 5 movies with like how long can I make a scene and then how like fast can I do the violence that climaxes the scene. So that scene is like 20 minutes of like increasingly tense talking and then like 10 seconds of everybody dying. It's pretty great.
Well, right, and I mean, one of the criticisms that's hounded Tarantino since the beginning is that he makes violent films, or he makes films that glorify violence or or bloody or gory, and they're really not. A lot more is implied, but I think he is, much more remembered for the violence in his films because of the way that he develops the characters around that violence.
Well, this film specifically is trying to complicate the violence, and like even when the characters are feeling good about it, you're feeling kind of bad about it, like the way that the theater at the end is it's a great thing because yay, killing Nazis, but at the same time it's a horror that recalls like the Holocaust, and so yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just I love it. It's a movie about the powers of film. It's a movie about the dangers of propaganda. It's a movie about the dangers of tribalism, and it's just a really fantastically made film.
Yeah,
and maybe possibly Tarantino's best looking film in terms of like set direction and art direction. Especially with a lot of the interiors and stuff when they're in Paris.
I prefer Kill Bill's more constructed visuals than this one, but
yeah, they're more mannered.
Actually, I think whether on purpose or not, I feel like his budget shows in this movie in a way that it usually doesn't. In terms of their environments, usually feel kind of more enclosed than I think they should, but maybe that's just me.
Okay, because there is in fact, I think, more Tarantino films on this list, so we should save more of this discussion for when we have it again with whatever the next film is.
He's a great filmmaker, and all of his movies deserve to be on this list, even if they were made before 2000.
Okay, so like I think you both have said, this is on both your lists still. I'm obviously abstaining, so on the list it goes. We're going to keep moving along. The next film on the list is one that both Amy and I voted for, and also one of, I think, the very few 2016 films that made the list, and that is There's a Plane, so we're just going to wait.
That's a really weird movie title. I didn't see that one.
It's a really abstract concept. It's just like the Andy Warhol thing with the can, except it's just a plane. Just going.
Did y'all see that they greenlit a sequel to Suicide Squad?
Is it a sequel to Suicide Squad, or is it the Harley movie?
No.
It's the Harley movie, but with David Ayer.
Well, no, but this is actually important. I didn't know this before. Originally, I thought that was going to be the only sequel. So this is the only one they've greenlit. But they're also still probably going to do a Suicide Squad itself sequel and a Will Smith spinoff.
Right.
Look, I have no problem with Ayers as long as the studio like fucking lets him do what he wants. Like, the problem with Suicide Squad wasn't that Ayers was bad, it was just that, like, that movie got jerked around 6 ways to Sunday.
I don't actually trust David Ayers. I don't think he's a good director, so the only reason I'm okay with this is because Harley was good in the movie, and he helped with that, so if that's what he's doing, it's fine, but I don't actually have faith in him.
I'd like to see the director's cut. I hear it's very, very differently paced.
I think whether I disagree with them or not, directors should be allowed to do what their intentions are, because changing intentions halfway through the movie or halfway through the edit is never a good.
Well, yes, I agree that if you are going to have shackles on them, those shackles need to be there for the very beginning. If you're going to do it. In this case, yes, that process is terrible. The fact that they just changed it halfway through and they made the mistake of getting those people who did the fucking trailer do it, and the trailer's obviously way different than what they wanted to do. And this also continued to have other problems because that's the reason The Flash is having to get a new director. Because I think The Flash is like, I kind of want to make my film a little more serious than most Flash films would be. And probably he's saying that because the TV show already is like a fun like thing and he wants it to actually be different. And of course DC was like, no, everything has to be funny now because we didn't actually learn the right lessons from our mistakes.
Yep.
Anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, Civil War wasn't funny really at all. But
well,
it had some jokes.
They're trying to be funny, that's the point.
Right, but I mean, you can't force stuff. It just has to be natural.
Oh yeah, like that's the thing. Like their original version was no jokes, and like, well, that's a terrible concept. And now, like, now all the jokes, like, it's also a terrible. Like, don't. That's the one flaw with Marvel. Their films are all fluff. Don't get rid of the one part of your movies that actually made them interesting.
I've been having this really like knockdown, drag out argument on the forums with this guy who's like, DC just needs to be, tonally similar, just like Marvel, and I'm like, no, the wrong lesson.
Well, the other problem is
who is that?
Harry Dresden.
I don't argue with Harry.
In the DC thread, if you want to read it.
The other problem is
I don't.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm saying just that guy. Don't argue with him. He won't quit, and he will wear you out.
I was arguing with him mostly for the punters who were reading and then observing. I think that's worthwhile, but yeah, he's frustrating.
No, I mean, yeah, the other problem is just that I made your entire studio around your entire idea around the fact that you were going to allow directors to do what they wanted, and now you're not. Like Marvel at least never lied about it.
Yeah.
Marvel's always like, no, you'll do what we say, and you know what you're signing up for. If I'm a DC person now, I'm like, why would I even bother signing up for it? You had the movie taken away from you halfway through.
Right.
Like now you just don't do either.
Yeah, it's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. So the only person who seems to be somewhat like, and even in Marvel, they let James Gunn do whatever the hell they wanted. So
yeah,
for the most part, as long as he fit like the rating. All right.
I wish that had something interesting for Doctor Strange. That movie bored the shit out of me.
Well,
holy fuck, that movie was boring.
Different discussion for a different time.
All right, I think you were about to introduce Zootopia.
I was. Let's let me do it again.
Okay.
Moving on, we're going to go to a film that both Amy and I had on our list, and this is in fact one of the few from 2016 that made the list due to kind of our cutoff points, and that is Disney's Zootopia. Amy, since you kind of brought up earlier kind of your issue with Disney films in general and like Pixar films the last couple of years, I guess, what made this one at least somewhat different to you than the others?
I still think it was, kind of very soft in the way Disney movies tend to be, but it was making a very strong political statement. And not only that, but a very progressive statement that, was aimed at kids, but it wasn't really dumbed down. And, I was really disappointed with both Disney and Pixar when WALL-E came out because, during the press tour, the suits really equivocated on the whole environmentalism aspect because they were worried it wouldn't play well, I guess, with stupid people. I don't know what else to call people who don't believe in environmental problems.
Well, some people are willfully ignorant, but I mean, regardless of what they said in the press briefings, the environmentalism really comes through very strongly in that film.
Right. I mean, basically that's the primary through line. It's a film about environmentalism and minding resources and being good to the planet and each other. And Zootopia was equally progressive with its message of inclusion and not reinforcing the idea that people aren't innately one thing or another just by accident of their birth or fur color. It's nice to see films not shy away from that, especially when they're aimed at a young audience. And the voice work was great as always. You had Idris Elba and Jason Bateman, and it was just always fun to hear.
Yeah, I was very. This film kind of caught me off guard a little bit because it had every makings to be especially since Disney released 2 films this year, like the Disney B movie, like the one where it seemed like they weren't really even trying that hard, and yet they instead come up with an actual rather clever script. Like you said, I think the way they peddled so easily too. Like it's not just they did progressive messages and lessons on different lessons on how you deal with racism and bigotry and things like that, but they did it without it didn't come off all the time as a lot of films would have just come off as a nonstop after school special, especially for a kids movie. And there's obviously moments that kind of veer towards this because it is still a kids movie, but there's just an effortlessness kind of to it, the way they bring in the joke about him calling the Jonah Hill character calling her cute. and kind of her doing the thing about how like bunnies can call bunnies cute, but it's kind of weird when other people like, you know, are getting to that. And the honest trailer for this is honestly great because it kind of shows like you're talking about how joyful and happy it is, and it just brings up like the numerous different types of progressive things that are in this movie that are lined out, like, you know, and are pretty clear and are great messages to get along to people, and helps this movie avoid kind of the trap that some kids movies fall into where they're afraid to like actually like try to like give a message to children that's actually helpful, as opposed to like not accurate or true to how the real world works.
Right. It's not just a series of platitudes.
Yeah, it like actually like gave reason behind the stuff they're doing, and you know, it just worked really well. I admit this is one film I've had to think about like a lot. I've thought about probably a lot more than a lot of other ones lately in terms of just like how much I've enjoyed it. And I've actually come back around towards it just because I really think the storyline they did was really strong. The character work was great. You know, I think the way they did their villains, even if they don't actually have a great central villain, but the way they ultimately use their villains thematically worked really, really well. And, you know, it's just like the visuals in this film, I think actually still worked for the most part. The jokes, you know, it has actually funny jokes, aren't just like juvenile. It like hit that right line of trying to like pedal between, you know, allowing adults to be entertained, but also being for children, and just kind of hit that right line of like, since we're unfortunately kind of stuck with this mindset in America that animation is mainly for kids, like this is at least a film that tried to like, as much as it could, be a little not as soft pedaling as kind of like other things have. So I just really enjoyed it. And obviously it has that wonderful song in it that I can't actually defend that, but I mean, the song's all right. Even as an attempt to somewhat troll Caillou, I can't actually do that. Hold on one second. Let this plane pass, and you can talk, Caillou.
Okay.
Or I will segue for you to talk. Caillou, this film wasn't on your list, and if I remember correctly, I believe you actually even saw it a little bit later than, like, in the year than most people. So it was kind of interesting, I guess, to hear kind of more of your perspective was coming from someone who didn't have to be within the initial post like hype bubble.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with the movie, and I'm actually going to argue pretty strong here and see if I can flip one of you. There's a couple things going on here. One is, and the easiest argument to make is this movie is from 2016. This movie is from a number of months ago. We do not have the perspective on this film that we do with every other film on our lists. And I think that it's just too soon to say that this is one of the 100 best of the 21st century compared to some of these movies that are personal favorites, that are movies that we've watched multiple times and loved every time and loved more and more and saw more things in it. Like, I think that this is too soon to canonize Utopia. That's my first argument. Next, I mean, as Samuel Goldwyn said, if you want to send a message, use Western Telegram. Like, I think that this film is so heavily about its message to the point that it feels like a propaganda piece. And the fact that I agree with what it's saying, or what it's trying to say, is sort of besides the point, in that I think that message kind of crowds out the actual story of it, because it was just so blatant to me of interpreting the things it was trying to say, and that I never really felt engaged with the narrative. I felt like they were just kind of doing this perfunctory, cop mystery, buddy cop thing as just a way to get their message out. So I feel like it really suffers as a film for that reason. And then my third problem is that even if you take it on its surface as like, okay, we're going to make this film and speak to kids, I think it gets the message wrong because I think the metaphor is misplaced. What you have is not actually like the progressive, the truly progressive message. You have sort of this halfway conservative like parody of the progressive message because in the real world, when we talk about prejudice, we're talking about things that people can't choose and that doesn't actually affect them. So, especially race. race is a social construct. It's not something that's based in genetics when it comes to behavior. Black people are not lazy because they're genetically inclined to be lazy. They're not lazy at all. But it's also not a genetic thing. They're black people aren't criminals because of genetics, and so on and so forth. And I think that the film gets the metaphor wrong because these are all animals. And there's a lot of jokes about animals based on the attributes of animals that children know. And it helps to make it an animated kids film. But at the same time, animals are distinct species. They have behaviors that are genetically motivated. And those behaviors are played off of in the movie. The movie argues not that these people are created equal in reality. It argues that their differences should not be brought up and should not prevent them from attaining the same kind of jobs or the same respect or whatever. And I think that part of that is good, but I think that the part of it that argues that they are fundamentally different and we just need to not talk about it, I think that's what conservatives think, liberals think, and I think that's not the right message to be teaching kids. There's this division of the film between predator and prey and things like that I think it just harms the message more. That so to the point where I'm not even sure if this is like as positive a gain for the kids who watch it as I think it wanted to be. So I think to summarize, I think the message is wrong. I think the message drowns out the story, and so I was really not left with much to like about this film other than like some of the world building, some of the voice acting is okay. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, there's always arguments to be made for the fact that obviously at some level this is a simplistic view of looking at things, and if you look at it as a lot of issues when it comes to things like prejudice and racial bias and racism and sexism and all these things, like once you get past a certain point, the level of complexity it gets to, admittedly, can get to the point where even things that seem well-intentioned can not work as well as you thought. And so on some level, I understand like the principle behind which you kind of filled out for this film. I didn't think those issues drowned out things as much as you did. I also think, based on even just seeing what the message kids seem to get from the film, most people get the positive versions of these things because that's what the film's trying. And the only way you're really going to get down to some of these more negative ones if you spend time just absolutely analyzing the film in a way that I think that only real like people doing close readings or critical analysis of the film will do. And so I just don't know if I agree that message you think would even get there would actually be spread to most people.
I think the people who get the message are adults who agree with the message and can see very clearly what the film is trying to say, and they agree with that, so they feel good. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think that like when you're talking about something that's going to be played to kids that is trying to teach kids something, I think kids not only get the stated message, but kids obviously absorb unconsciously all the other aspects of the films, and that's there's plenty of movies in history that are kids movies that have a very laudable stated moral whose construction as a story teaches kids some terrible shit. So I think that this movie, I don't know that it's necessarily true that this movie is that the kids are getting what we want them to get out of this movie.
Amy, did you want to go ahead and chime in, or do you want me to keep going?
It's a very interesting bit of language that Kaya has brought up. One that I'm familiar with, and one that I don't necessarily disagree with. I think the message of the film is a bit muddled, and oftentimes conflicting, and also very much okay with putting labels on people. But in the same turn, it's there's a lot of speaking out against that from certain characters, and then also showing that just because that you are systematically disenfranchised, it doesn't mean it's okay for you in turn to do that to someone else. And it also introduces children to the idea of political manipulation. With the ultimate reveal, I won't say it because it's a spoiler, but I mean, there's a lot of twists there at the end. I think the problem is, the medium that the movie uses to tell the story is, through these lives of animals who unfortunately, they're different species. They have different, roles in nature as predator and prey, and somewhere all along that spectrum. And so I think the film has to probably be constrained a little bit by that notion and that framework. And I agree with what Caillou says about, the message generally being more understood than, than what the film is articulating, other than what the film is trying to articulate. That said, oh yeah, well, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, because I obviously we've been listening to everybody's arguments all podcasts, all series, and this was a really unusual argument for me to hear from you, because it sounded like you were like, I like what it's saying and I agree with what it's saying, and it was fun, and that was kind of your argument for the movie. So like, if you remove the message aspect of it, because I don't know if you agree, but I don't think a movie should get in here on its message alone. Like, do you think that the movie itself as a story is really worthy of this?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe not. But I mean, we put a lot of emphasis on different aspects of determining a movie's quality. I mean, I don't think the first X-Men movie has a fantastic story, but I still think it's an important movie and worthy of a place on the list. And there's issues. The list is a top 100, but our criteria are kind of vague. It's not like the most perfect cinematic achievement. We get a few of those every year, and then they kind of come and go. I tend to think of the best as the films that stick with you, and I think Zootopia fits that bill. It generated a lot of public dialogue across a very wide age range, and did so, depending on how strongly you interpreted the message of the film, and on some measure of the progressive end of the scale.
And I'll just add that I actually found that since you brought up, I guess there's a couple of points I guess I'll address, but since you bring it first, like you think if you take away the message, I actually enjoyed for the most part the story that actually happened in the film. The message stuff to me like added to it. It didn't feel as like now I can't say if you literally removed it, but at the same time I think you're correct in saying literally a film probably shouldn't get in because of its message, but at the same time discounting it completely is also not.
I don't think the story is bad. I just don't think it's anything like special. I was kind of like on the story itself.
But I think it was good enough when combined with the stuff. I think message. I think that can make a movie go over the top. Even if that's just one example that I think they come together to make the movie be better as a whole.
The other thing is that like the flip side of like lauding it because of the message is that like there are movies that we laud very much despite their message. Which I think points to the fact that like that we should kind of look past what a movie is saying in judging its quality versus how it's saying it and how well it's saying it.
But I mean, I think those are just both equal. I think those are both factors. I think you're right. There are movies you can totally laud despite their perspective. But I think there are ones that part of the reason you can laud them is their message and how you say it. Now, like I said, part of why I like this one is I like, for the most part, how they did their message. I agree. Mm-hmm. There are problems with it. Like one is your animals thing is kind of interesting because it's kind of a similar argument to the issues you could have with like maybe Pleasantville in terms of like it kind of trying to take an issue, but like it used a metaphor that worked, but at the same time ends up using like, black and white versions of white people to tell a story about like racism, which doesn't entirely work because like you're not really using people who were actually affected by something. And so like, sorry, what were you saying, Amy?
I was saying also, I don't know if you remember or not, but the villain's name in Pleasantville was Whitey.
It was, you're right. Yes. Their issue, and I like
that film is more than about racism. That film is about kind of opening yourself to all sorts of experiences and removing different prejudices associated with all sorts of like small town sitcom problems.
I'm aware, and I like Pleasantville a lot, and I actually defend a lot for that reason. But that is an issue with the movie that you can't just pretend doesn't exist. And so this movie also has similar stuff, but I think the way I just found the way I think mostly it told the message to me mostly worked. I think it got across things that it needed to. Even though it was somewhat muddled, I think the key points it got around to doing quite well. And like Amy said, the discussion of the film brought, I think, was really important. I just think it impactfully. It felt like also just such a different thing for. Part of it also is, I mean, you could play this like what Disney has been doing with their films lately kind of played into it. Like this is also kind of a thing where you just wouldn't expect even just this level of dialogue at all to be in this. And I think it helps. And the medium from which it's going on matters in this case. And this kind of like is just a bunch of things. So there's a lot of factors that I think you're right. You can pick a lot of individual parts of this movie that make it seem off, but I just think together they all come together to make a whole that was a lot stronger than you would expect it. And then I guess just the other thing I will quickly just say is I don't want to get into this, but I understand the idea to say that something came out in 2016, so we haven't had time to look at it. I don't really, and sure, that's why obviously, if we had like 20 films in 2016 on here, that'd be a problem. But I don't know if I necessarily consider that to be a big enough reason to keep something off. If you
I'm just saying, like when a film, when you want to canonize a film that recent, it has to be a film that like leaps off the screen and slaps you in the face and says, "I'm going to be a classic." Like, this is no Mad Max Fury Road. Is kind of what I'm saying. Like,
no, and obviously,
I think both of you guys on your individual lists have better movies than this, even better animated children's movies than this. So that's my feeling.
I do, and like I said, I've had to rethink this, but I've kind of come back around towards how I think this is a film that ultimately I think deserves to be on the list. In fact, I think it is quite good. I think the message does as well. I think the conversation, there's just everything that came together to make this a film I think worthy of being on the list. And I thought there was actually a chance I might come off it, but the more I thought about it, the more I actually came around to actually liking a lot of what it did more. But anyhow, from this assumption, Caillou obviously, your stringent objection is a clear no.
I'm a strong no.
As I said, I think I'm actually fine with keeping it on the list for a couple of reasons that some with just how this list is being made and some with just how I think this is strong. So Amy, I guess it's up to you.
No, I'm going to keep it on the list as well. It's one of those things like if we do this again in 5 more years and, do the top 100 films of the last 20 years, it may not be on the list. I agree with Caillou that I don't think it's a particularly overwhelmingly strong narrative on its own. But I don't think we judge movies solely on one aspect or another.
Right.
There's no pass fail test for movies. And so this is just one of those kind of gray areas where right now I'm okay with this movie being on my list.
All right. Fair enough.
Well, you'll come to regret that later on this podcast. There's a pass-fail test for you, and you just failed it.
That she brought up a good point. When we make this, when you make the list matters. I can certainly say if we made this list 5 years ago, there are films that I had on my top 10 at the time. I had in this time that would have changed. So it's possible. There's films that I wish I could have actually put in from even this year that I won't be able to because of like when we made the list. So it just happens.
I really wanted Gods of Egypt, but I couldn't find a place for it.
This year being 2016.
You wanted to be really, really badly on the wrong side of history. I mean, that's I can understand. There is something to be said for just going all in. All right.
I think Dinesh D'Souza made a couple of films in the last few years, so put a couple of those on there.
You should keep in mind, David, this will air in 2017.
Well, but we're talking about it in 2016, and I don't think us pretending that. I'm not going to pretend.
All right. I'm just saying.
But like, I'm fine with us kind of acknowledging, based on us having this discussion, that we have to declare. I also want to say this because I feel like it helps declare like when we made our decision and what we're talking about movie-wise.
Okay.
Because if we were talking in 2017, I have a lot less justification for us not having just basically redone our list to include the rest of those movies we wanted to.
Okay.
Anyhow. So after that, fairly interesting discussion that went in a lot of fun directions, in which Caillou put a valiant effort, but was ultimately thwarted.
We're going to have a boring discussion about boring things.
Well, we are going to move on to, I think we'll probably not have the same depth of discussion, and that is a movie that was on both Amy and Caillou's list, and that's Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. Caillou, since this was on your list, so you at least at some level like it, I guess we'll let you go first so you can say some nice things.
I will hang on a flag here in that this was one of the movies that made the bottom kind of 10 of my list as I was deciding which of 30 films was going to get in those last few slots. So if David has a good argument here, I am totally open to it. I do like this movie a lot. I think it's another one of those kind of Ocean's 11 style, this is a really good Hollywood movie. It revitalized a genre. Well, maybe not even revitalized, because I'm not sure anything really followed suit. But it definitely took a dead genre and came out of the gate swinging with a really good swashbuckler movie that we haven't had in decades.
It also told us that if you try hard enough, you too can make a movie about a Disney park ride. It's totally happened successfully since then, and it's a great lesson to take from it.
A good movie can come from anywhere. It can come from a board game. It can come from a greeting card. It just depends on what your intentions are and how well you execute them.
Battleship was a totally great example of that board game one.
Well, I was thinking of Clue. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This also has a really good Johnny Depp performance that kind of blew everybody out of the water back when people were not sick of that. It's got very strong direction by Gore Verbinski, who's one of my favorite directors. He really brings the fun of the film is really it's got everything in here but the kitchen sink. They kind of rummage around in this genre and in the original source material of this theme park ride, and they just find as many set pieces and variations as they can to throw into this movie. And so it's bloated in that sense. It's overlong. It's often ridiculous, but it's still a movie where they're trying as hard as they can to have fun and find new ways to explore this world and this style. And it felt very fresh at the time. I think the series has gone way downhill since then, although I think the second one is pretty good. But yeah, it's. And I'm not even a huge fan of Orlando Bloom in this movie because Johnny Depp kind of steals it, and Keira Knightley actually does very well. But it captures that sense of adventure very strongly. And closes with that. I love the ending of this movie as Sparrow finally gets the ship that he wants and the crew that he wants, and he's finally set and ready to head off into the sunset. And he's like, "Bring me that horizon." And that moment always fills me with the excitement of the possibilities of an open world and freedom to explore it. So I think that it's not the deepest film by any means. It's not a perfect film by any means, and I'm willing to be argued out of it. But I do really enjoy it, and it's one that I will watch over and over again. And it's just kind of one of the modern popular classics.
Amy, anything to add?
Completely agree. It's a thoroughly mainstream film, but it takes all those mainstream elements and hits all those notes with near perfection, and turns them all the way up to 10. It's one of the rare few huge budget movies where you feel like you can actually see the budget everywhere. I mean, they shot almost completely on location in Jamaica. I mean, nothing looks really overdone, and even at, what was that, about 10 years ago? I think 12 years ago when the movie came out. A lot of the CG still works. I'm going to say it's cutting edge, but I mean, it works. It doesn't detract from the film. And it's they shot on location. They're using real ships. They're using real skeletons. There's a lot of reality in the film that I think lends to it. Yeah, I mean, Verbinski really went out of the way on, providing the texture for the film. And even in 2016 or 2017, whenever we air this, we haven't figured out how to recreate that texture completely inside a computer. and it's just something about, those really dank interiors that, make you feel like you're there in these old ships. And, like Caillou says, the thrill of possibility and adventure when, you're out there and just endless horizon. And yeah, I mean, and you have one timeless performance in Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow, but you also have some great turns from other people. And further down in the series, you continue to, but Jeffrey Rush is right there keeping up with Johnny Depp beat for beat with just a very different but equally weird performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you don't get a film that fires on all those cylinders at that level hardly ever. It's, it's something like I probably couldn't count on in one hand, a film that does it so well. And, the rest of the films just is kind of diminishing returns. I agree that the second one's good. I even like the third one a little bit. But no, the first one is just 100%.
The one more thing I wanted to say that is actually really good about the script is that if you go back and watch it, like the intrigue of like who is Sparrow going to like stop betraying, like as he betrays one faction after another, is like really well done in a really classical way that you don't see very often these days of a character who whose loyalties legitimately keep shifting and is trying to manipulate events. Like it's actually some fairly complex interplay between these different groups of people all vying for this cursed treasure, and it's really clever the way they do it.
All right, fair enough. So this movie, I will say, is probably the one I had the greatest conflict on. It also probably just barely missed my list.
Join us.
It probably also is one of like my favorite films. So honestly, only reason at this point I feel honor bound to at least somewhat argue against it because Caillou left the door open and I did set up this process.
Amy wants you to flip, whereas I'm kind of begging you to argue me out of this because there's so many better movies remaining than this movie.
I will at least do the following and say that look, like I said, this film to me kind of felt like the greatest divide I have between like my happy-go-lucky moviegoer self and my like cold film critic self that comes out through having gone to film school. I don't like a lot of my complaints to this movie aren't so much individual things because I think a lot of it does work really well. This is a movie that like this movie along with like Lord of the Rings movies were definitely like one of the things that really, really, really got me into movies. Ultimately, it kind of just came down to when you look at a movie like this, it's like, look, I love this movie. Is this movie one of the 100 best films of the 21st century? And it's just no. It's a really fun movie. It's good. It does things really well, but I mean, it doesn't, even I would say it doesn't do anything particularly great. Yeah, Johnny Depp gives a great performance, and it helps that was the first one as opposed to us now having seen, like if it's hard now to kind of look at it and think that that's as impressive as it was at the time when you now see he just has basically been doing that same performance in some way, kind of for like every year since then, with some minimal exceptions. This movie just doesn't like, and to me, it just doesn't quite hold up compared to a bunch of other things, which is why I ultimately left it off the list. It's fun, but I mean, I honestly kind of apply a lot of the same arguments I applied to Ocean's 11 that I applied, here. Like, I agree there's good mainstream things. This is a really good example and I think this is actually a better example than Ocean's 11 of a good mainstream movie for me. But, ultimately, even though I feel that, I just don't know if I actually think it, there are other films I think there's better. And like, if this makes the list, I'm not going to be that sad because like I am a pretty big, I'm a fan of this movie, but like, I ultimately had to ask myself, like, can I put this on the list? And it was just like, no, I can't. It would just be too much. Similar reasons why I left Pacific Rim off the list. I really love both those movies, but that doesn't mean they deserve to be there. And, that's just kind of how it happened.
I think it definitely has some problems. I think that the humor is kind of too gentle, and like I said, it's a little long. And Orlando Bloom, I think, is probably the biggest weakness of the movie because I think he's just not right for this role, and I don't think he plays it terribly well.
He grows into it. The problem is he grows into the role. The movies around him get worse.
Right. He's much better, because to begin with in this movie, he's sort of he's supposed to be kind of this dashing innocent who learns to be a pirate, and I don't think he sells either side of that well enough to really make that transition. Once he is more of a rapscallion, then he sort of works better later on in the series. But in this one, it's a real problem. It's only not more of a problem because Johnny Depp, like I said, steals the show.
I mean, honestly, his storyline progression is actually done better through Elizabeth Swann.
Yeah, she has the same arc, and it's much more
really, honestly, she really should have probably actually been the main characters of that series.
Yeah.
I mean, she fits a lot of the boxes more, but I can understand why Bloom did that. And yeah, you're right. Bloom is, there are actual issues with the movie. I just meant individual issues aren't really what knocked it off for me. So look, the arguments you guys made are basically arguments I made with I had this argument basically with myself when making my list, pretty much verbatim, saying pretty much exactly what you guys said versus exactly what I honestly said. So I can't really say there's anything new that came up. So
the other thing I think Ocean's 11, I think is the significantly better made film. Even if it's less, smaller in a lot of ways.
I think it's better made, but that's just because Kraft is definitely a much stronger pursuit of Soderbergh than it is. I like Verbitsky, but that's not quite as strong a suit for him as it is for Soderbergh. I still think Pirates has ended up being better, but I would agree with you on that.
I don't know. I'm voting no. Screw it.
You're voting no without me actually offering a real argument? Well, that's...
Yeah, look, this. I went back and forth on this movie, and I've successfully gotten enough. This is a good mainstream Hollywood fun movie on this list. That, fuck it. I'm gonna pull for one of the more interesting things that we have on our individual list. So there you go.
Okay.
Let's in the battle between for the soul of this list between films that we like and films that are excellent. I'm gonna pull for excellent at this point.
I don't know how I feel about this.
You can always screw me over by flipping your vote, which would just be.
Well, I could, but this is actually Amy. Are you actually? This is actually an important thing still, though. So, Amy, are you still good though with this movie since you urged me to join the side?
I want to give you a counter argument.
Okay.
I established the last couple conversations that there's more than one metric we can judge films by.
Oh, yeah.
And we all seem to be in very much consensus that this is a really fun film with some really good iconic performances, and what it does nearly perfectly. It's got some pacing issues, but I can't come up with another example, not just in the last 15 years, but in the last 30 years of a film that strives for this level of, mainstream adventure and hits its mark so consistently.
Indiana Jones would be my go-to.
Well, I said 30 years.
Yeah, she said 30 years. So,
well, what about the third one?
Depending on which Indiana Jones you want to count.
Yeah, you talking about Crystal Skull? Fuck you.
No, he's talking. I think you're still telling me.
Conversation's over.
No, the third one.
Yeah.
So, what was that? 88, 89, somewhere in there.
We're still in range. We're technically one good Indiana Jones film would still count.
Okay, but yeah, that's how far back you have to go. It's definitely in that vein. But that's the kind of iconography we're dealing with here, and I'd feel comfortable putting Indiana Jones in my top 100 of 20th century, even though it's not an amazingly important movie.
Mad
Well,
Max. Mad Max is more of an adventure film. Is a better adventure film.
I'm not going to get into about how important Indiana Jones I think ultimately is, but that's a fair argument. I assume that means, though, like you're saying, you were definitely on the side of the yay.
Yeah, and I understand you guys' arguments too.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't think they're like wrong or bad. I think there's something to be said for incredibly well crafted mainstream entertainment.
I
So
don't,
I'm
like I
sticking with
said,
yay.
I don't disagree with that argument. And
I think it works, but I don't think it's as artful as I would like it to be. But I don't think it's perfect. I think it's really good. So that's why.
No, and I will say that this, no matter what, will be a film that, no matter what, will kind of be a problem point for me. So what I would say is, right now, I'm still leaning towards no. With that said, this is the first time this has actually happened. That does, in fact, not mean the film has been eliminated from the list. All this means is that this is going to... Part of the reason I kind of have to say no here is I think the films that get voted on by two people in this case, specifically this one, mean something a little different for what they do than some of the films we're going to have to argue for individually. And that film, Pirates, ultimately just doesn't fit to me like the rest of them do. But what's going to happen now is when we go to our individual list, Pirates now goes onto your list, Amy, and we're going to go address it again. And basically, it will now be weighed against basically the rest of the films as opposed to just itself. Well, or how Caillou's doing it now, but he'll have an actual list in front of him as opposed to the arbitrary idea of a list.
It's all right. I like it.
So you will get a chance to, when we do the single process, you'll get to argue this again. And I will say that, you know, depending upon exactly how the other films go, there's still a strong chance this film, I ultimately could be swayed, but it's just going to depend on some things. And
I'm going to build a case for it, and you're going to be so sorry.
I am hopeful that by the time we have confronted the vast stack of great movies that are on our list singly, that Pirates will pale in comparison. So,
well, like I said, that's ultimately the reason it didn't make my list. But at the same time, if this makes the list overall, I'm really not going to be that sad. Look, no matter what happens to this movie, Pirates is going to be a contention point. If it makes the list, I'm also going to be like, I don't know, man. If it doesn't make the list, I'll be like, but Pirates, I loved you so much. So yes, look, inner child David and adult David are really really hating each other right now. So that is the first film that didn't get voted in. Though I will admit, of the ones I thought there was a chance it could happen with, this is one of like the 5. So fair enough. I actually was surprised. I'll admit, this is an example of when I realized that I was the pretentious one on the list. When this is an example of movie where like, oh, I shouldn't include this. There's no chance. And then both of you had it on your list. And I was like, well, fuck. Anyhow, we're going to go on to, we have 4 more films to discuss for the ones with some consensus. So we're going to try to get through those, and then we'll move on from there. So the next film is one that both Caillou and I voted for, and that is Hayao Miyazaki's The Wind Rises.
You want to kick us off?
I'm actually going to let you do that.
Okay.
Because I'm going to talk a lot about anime at some points for different ones, and you are not. So I'm going to let you take this for a moment to talk about this, especially because I think this may be the only, due to a kind of factors, I think, this may be the only Miyazaki film, this is the only Ghibli film that actually made the list from this century.
Yes.
So part of that is because I'll just say right now, I haven't seen Spirited Away, so there's a good chance that's why it's not on my list. But yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of Spirited Away. I liked this movie a lot when I saw it. I am going to talk it up and then probably vote no on it. Because I think that it's benefiting too much from being, you know, the only eligible Ghibli film.
It's not the only eligible Ghibli film. It's just
well,
it's the only eligible Miyazaki film.
Whatever. The only eligible Miyazaki film. Yeah, you're right. I haven't seen any other Ghibli's. Okay, look.
I'm just saying because Amy doesn't like anime.
It's his last film. It's his last film until he comes out of retirement. Let me talk about why I like it first. I like the movie because I think it really appeals to me on the level of the autobiographical qualities of it. Every director has a different way of kind of talking about themselves through their work, and only Miyazaki could have created this film, which is both very sincere and heartfelt, and also given to sometimes literal flights of fancy. I think it's a very gorgeous movie. I think it has moments that are truly excellent, and I think it has a lot to say about kind of the nature of art and the responsibility of the artist, how art comes out of pain. But I think that the film implies that means it's kind of on the artist not to cause more pain, but to find something positive in the world. And he looks at that story through kind of the story of his father, who designed airplanes during World War II and before, and saw them used to kind of horrific effect in the war. And it sort of is the tragic story of a guy whose dream is just to make this, to design these planes, which is just kind of the thing that he was born to do. And the tragedy is that, nobody's going to pay you to make a plane unless they're going to use that plane for something. And in this case, the only way to really innovate in the industry was to work for the military, the Japanese military at the time. And they were going to use those planes to bomb people during the war and to shoot them down. And the horror that he has to confront with that is very, it's very affecting. So I think it's a very powerful film. I think it's a fairly complex film with a lot to say. My main issue with it, besides the fact that I think it gets just a little too much of a boost from being his last film, especially because it's not now his last film, is I think on a plot level, it's a little unformed and kind of confusing. He doesn't really navigate the difficulties of like a decade spanning biographical picture in an interesting or terribly effective way. So I think this is another movie that's kind of the less than some of its parts, even though some of its parts are quite good. So yeah, overall, I'm inclined to vote no and free up more space for better movies that I think are more effective at what they're trying to do. But David, tell me about what you think.
Well, first off, I part of the point of this particular process was that you argue yourself out of a movie for the purposes of freeing up other movies.
It's not by this, no. It's me. So look, there's a little bit, no. It's not. I'm not voting strategically here. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like when I say I'm voting to free up space, I mean that I think that there are. Looking at it now, I think there are better movies, including some movies that you guys came up with that I didn't come up with at the time. So I think it's just a matter of like, if I'm comparing this to all films and that's what I have to do to see whether it's the top, I'm like, well, I don't know if this is the top. I know it was a movie I really liked when I saw it. I feel a little less positive about it now. And I just don't think that it should be on this top 100 list for itself.
But like I said, fair enough of I can't actually literally force you to vote in a way based on things you did before, even though I'm obviously not going to argue against you. And just to make sure, Amy, have you seen The Wind Rises?
I've been folding clothes this whole time. Not paying attention.
So, but I think the thing is, like, you haven't seen this.
I heard Miyazaki, and I was like, I'm going to go do anything else.
Right. So that's my actual problem, is I don't know if there's actually going to be a real counter-argument against it, but sure. All right. Anyhow.
I abstain. All people like.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You haven't seen the movie, right?
To say the least.
Yeah. That's.
I don't. No, I've tried. I've given it my all.
Yeah.
I can't do. You know what I mean?
Well, then argue me off the ledge.
I have to argue for every anime.
No. I mean,
same argument.
David,
No, not you. I was explaining why that Caillou's like pedaling back no is a little problematic based on how we designed the purpose of this process, but it's fine. Look, I will say this. This movie is a really interesting movie for me too, because it wasn't even like, for example, my favorite animated film I saw of the year it came out, though that's not necessarily, which may sound like at first like, oh wow, but like it's not actually, considering the film that I did vote actually made my top 10 list. So that's not really a much thing, but I will say that like my relationship with this movie, I kind of had to grow when I really had to think about it, because this is in a lot of ways such a different film than a lot of stuff Miyazaki does. There's definitely things you can tell, like the dream sequences are like the real Miyazaki stuff, where he does like the things you would expect to see from him. It was also nice to see him do this, considering, I will say the one really nice thing is just he at least was able, he pushed forward things visually again in this movie that I felt he didn't in, like, for example, like the last film he had done before that was basically Ponyo. And while that movie is really pretty, it's traditionally pretty by the standards he does. And so seeing him actually willing to do somewhat new stuff again was interesting. I thought he played, the way this movie plays ultimately though, with the idea of like, they make a really big deal about the artist in the movie in his dream sequences talks to basically like it wouldn't be a contemporary, but I guess like a person who is also in the field, another genius basically. And they make a really big deal of this idea that there's like a 10-year period of like genius. And that's kind of why the decade happens. And this idea of like how art can be at its strongest for, and whether or not the 10 years is accurate, but just the idea of like how art can be like strong for a certain point and based on certain factors. And then you kind of have to walk away or accept this. And it fit really well, obviously, not as well now, as you said, since at the time Miyazaki was stepping away and it sounded like he was kind of acknowledging like, well, my time has passed, and it fit really well.
Yeah, now he's like, and another thing.
I mean, to be fair, I never believed he was going to be retired, so I never really took much, from that. But I still think the message is a really strong one, and I think it fits throughout the movie, and it helps narratively bring things up in ways that are just like, it helps narratively be a thread in this movie that is really needed, because this is a movie about like a dude who designs planes in World War II. This is not the most interesting thing. If another director had done like this movie, just like as a biography, and you can pick pretty much whoever the hell you want, this movie would have been really boring. It just should not have worked. Miyazaki, I agree with you. The idea that this is like a film that only Miyazaki could have done like well, I think is a really important factor. And I think it really fits. It kind of showed where he had grown. The film itself, like I said, is just beautiful. And I think this argument matters a little bit more in animated films than it does in, at times, live action films, because how it's beautiful is important. And I thought formically it actually helped bring animation up in levels with some of the stuff he did. The dream sequence stuff like did some things with animation that is just very different than even stuff he had done before. The style in which he like fully seeing him fully like embrace his style, but also be able to use it in a way that doesn't just have to involve fantastical elements worked really well. I think this is a really affecting film. The storyline, he was able to combine this with the storyline that goes with him from this, and also like the storyline of him and his wife, and the tragic story involving his wife. And I think ultimately that helps. It's hard for me to argue because this is a similar argument too. Obviously why I won't be changing my vote is that, I think this is the best of the ones I have seen, and comparatively of the Miyazaki films. The idea of him not being on the list is weird to me. At the same time, obviously, the same time with Soderbergh, I can understand how this could theoretically happen.
But Miyazaki also, his reputation is largely built on films before the 2000, if I'm not mistaken.
His mainstream reputation, his real mainstream is built on Spirited Away. There are other ones too that people really like, but if we're going to talk about when really people realized it, that's why Spirited Away that was the one Miyazaki film that made the BBC list. In fact, I think it was like 3.
Well, Spirited Away and Mononoke was 97, so.
Right, Mononoke was 97.
Yeah.
But, Mononoke was the other one, but like even Mononoke, people who do animation know it, but like I'm not like Spirited Away is what made people who don't really do animation like.
Yeah, you I kind of have no doubt that you would be arguing for Spirited Away, and I would be arguing against it because I'm not a huge fan of that movie. If you had seen Spirited Away instead of The Wind Rises, because like looking at his filmography in this period, you've got Spirited Away, you've got Howl's Moving Castle, you've got Ponyo, and you've got The Wind Rises. So like that's not actually. I don't think it's actually incredible that we shouldn't have a Miyazaki film on.
No,
here.
and I think it's fair, which is why I'm bringing that up. But at the same time, I actually do think The Wind Rises is an exceptional movie. I think it works on levels where I think he did things in that movie that few others could do, and I think it actually is a great movie, worth praise and worth remembering. And I think part of the reason it gets like somewhat overlooked is it came out the same year as Frozen, and basically,
clearly that's my problem with it. Is I'm just too in love with Frozen.
No, but I meant like. I think
you
the
said
film would
that.
have even more respect for it if it didn't come out the year in which they're basically everything else in existence was eaten by the giant black hole that is the coverage of Frozen.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that, like, I think the film is kind of boring. Like, I really appreciate a lot of what it's doing, but I also feel like it's kind of boring, and I think that may be actually my biggest problem with it.
I mean, as I said, I don't ultimately think it was. I mean, I think the subject matter is boring. I don't think his version of it was boring. But I can't sit here and say that a story about a plane maker is a riveting storyline. But I think his version of it was quite well. And I think it worked. And, you know, if Miyazaki's style and, you know, it kind of depends. Like part of this also is I think some actually came together to make it work better than it is with his stuff. And I think it's a worthwhile movie to include. On its own. I mean, regardless of, like you bring up what I said, I agree that it may benefit some from like the actual added weight it has of like being, you know, Miyazaki's at the time last film and, you know, being, you know, a lot of his, even just it being like the better film he's done of like some of his stuff in the 2000s,
Yep.
You know, but I guess I feel like I need to say, I don't feel like this is, for example, if we like wanted to include a Godard film just because it was Godard and he did another film, we should just assume it's a genius, even though like late life Godard, well,
there's not a critic who doesn't love Goodbye to Language, and I will probably never see it because it sounds like the most boring thing I've ever heard of.
But that's my point. Like if you wanted, like, you know, that I wouldn't be like, you know, I don't think it's simply that film. I think on its own it more than holds up. But we have made Amy go into her like cocoon of abstention for far too long. So,
well, I realized that I have to watch Wolf Children by the time we talk about the movie because I haven't seen it and Amy hasn't seen it, and so you can't just like put a movie on the list by yourself. So I need to go watch this movie.
That's not entirely true for our top 10 purposes, but sure, I'm not going to tell you not to go watch something that's amazing.
Oh yeah, I'll be right there.
That's my point. Like Amy cannot even participate in this discussion. But anyway.
Anyhow, I mean, when we actually discuss our top 10, I will actually explain to you how that's actually not in fact true. But
okay.
But yes, if you wish to watch it, I'm not going to like begrudge you watching an amazing movie. Just like you wouldn't begrudge me for watching things you insist I should watch. And also, to be fair, I will say Miyazaki didn't make Wolf Children, so it's not quite the same. But fair enough. Presumably, because you're doing this, Caillou, I assume that means you were sticking with your no.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my no.
Which there's issues with, but fine.
I mean, I don't think we disagree in our assessment of the film. I think you just like what it does more than I do. I think that's kind of the crux of it.
I just, you know, I've said I have a little issue with the fact that this is happening based on this, but fine. Well, there's plenty of arguments to have.
It's not that. It really is just me. Like, I don't think I thought too strongly about this movie when I put it on my list to begin with, and now that I have to actually defend it, I'm like, oh, yeah.
Fair enough. So this will go back down onto my list, and I will argue again, which will be fun since Amy will once again abstain, and should be great. Well, Amy, this film was on your list and Caillou's, and presumably you actually enjoyed it. So hopefully you can talk about this in ways with some joy, and that is Let the Right One In.
Yay! Which
normally I would actually let Caillou talk about first, But since Amy literally had nothing she could add to the last discussion, I'm going to let her actually talk about this first.
Nothing good,
So
anyway.
go ahead, Amy.
Just to be clear, we are talking about the original, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Not the Rata Koma In is how nobody pronounces it because I'm terrible.
Yeah, don't do that.
All right, I forgot that I was going to make you pronounce the foreign names of these films. So how do you pronounce The Wind Rises in Japanese, David?
I believe it's I have no, but Kaze Tekenu.
Okay.
Takanu? Something like that.
Anyway.
It's important. We need to know.
Uh-huh. But yes. So, right. Let the right one in, Amy.
All right, so let's write one in. It's that great bit of a kind of horror movie you just really don't see anymore. I don't even know if I could completely classify it as horror, just because it takes so much of its time to really be a character study of two very lonely children. I mean, it's just got a lot of elements that don't typically come into play in traditional horror. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of scenes of excessive violence, not terribly gory throughout, and much of the screen time is spent with two very, very young actors talking to each other, and doing so well, telling a very tense story that is kind of complicated. And tonally, the ending, feels like it should be happy, but when you think about it and dig into it, it's really kind of bizarre and possibly very fucked up. And not to mention the whole controversy of the stuff that was left out from the book. I don't really know if that bears talking about here.
Nope.
So let's skip all that. But yeah, some great performances. One of those great hidden gems that typically wouldn't get a lot of play in the U.S. It was just breath of fresh air to see something new and novel, and not cost an arm and a leg to get it done. It wasn't trying to beat you over the head with horror bona fides. It was very content on telling its story.
All right. Caillou, this film was in fact in your top 10, so go ahead and discuss your great love for this movie.
Yeah, I love this movie. I also admire this movie a lot. This is the second movie we've talked about directed by Thomas Alfredson, who I also wrote it. He is purely on the basis of those two films, like one of the premier adapters of existing novels working today. It's based on a John Lindquist novel, who is sort of the Swedish Stephen King, it is said. And this kind of has a lot of commonalities with King in terms of it being about children and growing up in kind of a harsh environment and dealing with bullies and kind of mixing in a supernatural element in a way that kind of elevates the story. I think it's basically perfectly shot. I've written a long article on the blog about how his directorial techniques really sell the story of how these kids are isolated. Oscar by kind of his troubled home life, and that his parents are divorced and his mother is kind of distant, and also his problems at school, and then Ellie, because of her kind of vampirism, which forces her to live in this like fucked up symbiotic relationship with this old man who loves her deeply and goes out and gets her blood when needed. The movie is both a horror movie and a love story, and which one is on top is always shifting. And that's one of the things that drives how wonderful the film feels to experience and think about. It makes great use of the snowy Swedish suburban environment. And it has just some incredibly gorgeous shots, some really affecting character moments. The central metaphor of vampires can only come in if they're invited that carries through to like of all the people in your life. You know, you have to be careful to let the right one into you and into your heart, so that you know they don't hurt you. You got to find the person who's going to protect you and be good for you. And whether they do that or not is actually kind of questionable. It's kind of up to the viewer at the end. They may have kind of made the best of some bad choices, or picked the least bad of some bad choices. But you know, there's moments in this film that are just stand out as some of the greatest in cinema. I love the pool scene. Yeah, just the emotional arc of the movie is very strong, and that's down to the direction and the performances that Amy mentioned. Especially, I think the kids are phenomenal. Especially like you know, without even talking, their faces are so expressive in such a particular way. So I think it's a beautiful film that's sort of the corrective to like the bullshit Twilight vampire stories that are so prevalent these days.
Okay. I will say that as a question of just how this film looks, it is stunning. Half the reason, like when Hoytema does other things now, I'm just like, do whatever you want, man. You can do it, is because of this movie. So I would never argue against how pretty this movie is. It was another one that honestly left me colder towards it than I expected. But I was not as much a fan of like some of the other craft of the movie. I don't actually like a lot of some of the direction in the movie. I don't think it worked as well as I would have liked. There's ways certain scenes that just never were like for me. The
only parts that I don't wholly like are the parts where she goes out and hunts. I think that they're not quite done as well or as interestingly as the rest of the film.
Yeah, I think part of I think my issue with the direction is just because of what you talked about, the two tonal stories, like the two stories they're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think at time they blend. I don't think at time Offerson blends them quite as well as he should. And I respect, this movie comes down to one where I respect a lot of it. I respect the idea that someone really wanted to do this type of movie and what it represents.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I agree. It's the kind of movie people aren't willing to do. And I would encourage more versions of this movie to exist. I don't think he stuck the landing in just enough places, especially to make something like my top 100 list. Mm-hmm. A lot of, I think he benefited from, this is one of those ones where at times I have trouble telling like how much credit I should give the director versus cinematographer for things, and which somewhat clouds thing. It's kind of the issue I've had at times with how I evaluate Inarritu, since he always works with Lubezki for the most part. So and when he doesn't work with Lubezki, he works with someone else who's top notch. So it's just kind of hard at times to separate those.
Well, you should go back and read my blog post again, because none of that cinematography. It's all the wonderful and coherent intentionality of the director.
Well, right. Not all of it. I'm not saying he was terrible as a director. I just don't think a lot of it worked as well for me as it did for you. I mean, there's still, there are still great decisions in this, the swimming, the scene in the pool, and when he's in underwater and then she attacks the bullies.
Yeah,
is I don't actually think that scene entirely works as well as it could have. At the same time, the fact that he was willing to make the decision to show the scene like that is just a bold, brilliant decision that I wish more filmmakers would make.
That hilariously, and I like the remake. I think the remake is pretty good, but the remake totally doesn't go that route and goes a very, very different route of lots of confused shots and kind of standard shaky cam stuff in that scene. And it's what are you doing? What are you doing?
The minimalism there, I think, it works well. The minimalism in this movie in general, I think, does work well. But I just don't think this film to me came off as one that was a really noble effort that was just kind of flawed and never quite worked as well as it should. And to me, it just never quite fit, which is just how it is for some of these films. Which is why, I would still vote no on this, just because this is the argument you're making or some of the ones I've meant, but doesn't fit. At the same time, I really do genuinely mean in this case, man.
Okay.
This is more of a principle. This is more of I actually believe that if unless there's a new argument, like that time is brought up to me that like you should keep to the vote you had when you originally made your list, and like.
Well, yeah. No one is saying you have to be, you have to make this unanimous just because. Like, it's fine.
But yes, I assume, as I said, Caillou, you are keeping your vote for your top 10, one of your top 10 movies.
Yes.
And Amy, I assume you have not, you were good as well. And I guess, is there anything else you wanted to add as a final point about the movie before we move on?
No, not really. I think we're good here. We've kind of been all over it. But yeah.
All right, 2 more movies. Next film we're going to talk about is one. I'm actually going to switch this up a little bit, which is another one that Caillou and Amy, you guys have both seen and voted on your list, and I have not. And that this one I can't entirely tell if this would be on it, but I also have not seen it, so I can't talk about it too much. But that is Dear Zachary. Sorry.
It's the full title is Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his a letter to a son from his father. Is that what it is? I'm sorry,
Yep.
I launched into this and I wasn't clear.
Yes, I think you're right.
Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Yes.
Yes, I decided I would let the person who's actually seen the movie say that title. So,
I don't know if we want to discuss that if you haven't seen it. There's not really any way to.
well, just
really
briefly
get into
say,
it.
kind of, especially because this is one of the few docs that is going to probably make our list.
I can definitely talk about this in a non-spoiler way, Amy.
So,
So do you want me to
just,
start?
you can just quickly say kind of what you liked about it, and if you spoil it, you spoil it. That's my fault for not making it. So whatever you want to say it.
You don't actually have to spoil this. Talk about the fact that it is like eminently spoilable. So this is a documentary. We have extremely few documentaries on our list, and that's
Yeah, and I'll
probably
just
just
flat out
because
say
we
that
all
is
suck.
Yeah, that is a very big weak spot in my movie watching. I'll just admit that now.
I had a few.
Yeah, I have like a couple.
I don't think I have any. So,
yeah. So like, so we haven't really talked about like documentary at all in this podcast and what documentary is like meant to do. I think that this is unique even for documentaries. It's very much a kind of essay film on the part of a single filmmaker who's kind of expressing himself, which is not usually what documentaries are about. Usually documentaries are informational or they're advocacy films. And what's special about this one is that it begins so personally and by the end has very meaningfully transitioned into an advocacy film. So, this is a movie about a man who is murdered. And the filmmaker was a friend of his and used the film as kind of a means of investigating the man's death and the case and trying to find or prove who killed him. The film is constructed, it's perhaps most interesting beyond the structure of the script or the structure of the film, I guess I should say. It's beyond that, it's most interesting for its style and its editing. The film takes a very unique view of editing by having a lot of rapid-fire images that are sort of free associations or ways to illustrate the story that are totally unexpected. The one that leaps to mind immediately is when he's talking about his friend's death, who was shot. The film cuts between images of the body and the autopsy reports, close-ups of the bullet holes, and the editing itself is kind of doing the violence to the body by putting these two together. And there's a lot of that throughout the film. So it builds motifs in a very interesting way, and it creates these associations. And over time, it moves from just this personal story to I didn't even realize it, but this is there's political meaning here. There's action that you as the viewer can take to try and make this situation better. So to me, it's a film that's very much an act of kind of active, positive action, I guess, towards starting from this is a terrible thing that's happened and I feel bad about it to like, here's what I can do about it. Here's the positive change I can affect in the world through my art. So I think it's very special and deserves to be on this list, even alongside some exquisitely crafted fiction films that we've discussed.
Fair enough. Amy, do you have anything you just wanted to briefly add about why you like this movie so much?
Yeah, I mean, I need to be careful with my language. I mean, it just seems like anything that I want to get into is potentially very spoiling, and it's a film that really deserves not to be spoiled. But yes, the film didn't start out as an activism film. The film started out as a personal project, and it's interesting to see the build up as to where that turn takes.
Yeah, sorry if I can break in real quick. Like, I want to be clear that it's not like he tricks the audience. It's that the process of making this film changed his opinion of what the film needed to be.
Right. Plus, I mean, it's just the habit of making a film. Sometimes things change and you have to go with it. Especially if it's a documentary. If you're trying to tell the whole story. But it's an intensely personal film in a way that documentaries rarely are. I mean, documentaries are almost always a kind of detached journalism where, we see problems from afar and interview the people close to them and, develop kind of a thesis around it. But, rarely is that personal association the starting point. And rarely is that personal association so intimate and connected. But no, I haven't been affected on an emotional level like I have by a documentary besides this one.
Yeah,
and I mean, it becomes a truly great film as an activism film at the end. I mean, again, I don't know spoil anything, but I mean, it gets a lot done. It makes its case, and people listened.
All right. Well, I will say that I'm happy that this means at least one documentary will be on the list. If for no other reason,
I counted while Kai was talking. I have 5.
Well, I mean,
we do. It's not traditional. We did vote in Waltz with Bashir.
Oh, I was going to say, other than Waltz with Bashir, which is kind of a weird. It's a documentary, but by making animation, they're able to do some things that documentaries can't normally do. So,
yeah,
it's a weird hybrid. But yes, if we count that, then yes, that's the one I had on my list. Obviously, I've always heard good things about Dear Zachary. So, if anything was going to make it, this is one of the ones I'm okay with, and just put on the list and move on. And hopefully, Amy will be able to tell us more later on her list about how terrible we are for not having more docs on our list. So. For the last film we're going to talk about that had any consensus among us, we have one that Amy and I agreed on, and that is Pixar's Inside Out.
Boo! 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 The crowd has spoken.
Which Caillou is booing, even though he doesn't actually hate this movie that much. He's just on an island, and it has made him more curmudgeon-y about it since then. I will start, I suppose.
It's all the scurvy.
Is not my favorite Pixar film, but it's definitely up there to me in like their top tier of actual good movies. It to me actually was able to. It was a nice return to form for them after they kind of meandered a little bit a couple of years before, as they tried to figure out what they want to do after Toy Story 3. The visuals of the movie, I think, are actually, like I said earlier, that this is probably the visuals I found the most. Well, I think Finding Nemo was probably the most beautiful from just a pure animation standpoint. I actually found the design of this one to be the most striking. I enjoyed the emotional journey they have in this movie. I thought they did a really good job of trying to figure out how to talk about emotions is very difficult. They did a good job of kind of simplifying it in a way that most people can understand, but still roughly keeping it in a way that isn't entirely just crap pseudoscience that they do sometimes and things like this so kids would understand it. They did a really good job of showing growing, kind of what the process of growing up means and kind of how things aren't always black and white. They use this through emotions in this case, but everything's not always going to be happy. Everything's not always going to be sad. all emotions have kind of value, and part of growing up is realizing that, like, you can't run away from just being sad all the time or being angry all the time. You have to kind of embrace all of them. Hold on, I'm gonna wait for this plane to finish. That was the far off time. It's a movie I think that managed to really just kind of showcase kind of the old things, what Pixar used to do really well, and kind of showed they could still do real if they're willing to work on original works, which is kind of what made me more sad that they, at least for the foreseeable future, have kind of committed to only doing like follow-ups to movies. And even though the follow-ups they're going to be doing are for things that most people really like The Incredibles, it's still kind of sad. And just, I guess in general, like, I can think of a few things that kind of emotionally hit me as much as the Bing Bong scene does, and how that works, and the concept of kind of like what it stands for, of like having to move on from your childhood and what it represents, and how that can be both the sad and happy process, and how that works. Since this is also on your list, what would you like to add?
From that kind of the writing, the feminist progressive viewpoint is kind of my shtick at the Kraken. And from that, I was really happy with this film in the way that not only did it feature, I don't know if I would say that Riley was the lead character, but I'm certainly she was the key character for motivating the story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole movie is about the emotional conflicts around major changes in your life when you're a young teenager.
Plus, like, the two main emotions, if you really want to do that, the two main emotions are also going to be from a feminist perspective. So that's somewhat helps.
Right. So no, like I think on paper that sounds very risky.
Oh yeah.
And I know it's Pixar, and they could probably pitch really wild stuff and get it through, but it's risky, but it's also very tame.
If I could break in real quick, I think it angers me when people say that that's risky. It's not risky. It's only risky because people think it's risky. It's just the conventional wisdom that boys won't watch a movie about a girl, and that's just not true. And I think it's bullshit.
That's not why the film was risky.
Okay. That's fine.
No. I don't think it's risky because it was about a girl. I think it's just
the concept is risky.
Yeah, I think the concept's a hard sell. I mean,
I don't think so. Sure.
When you're trying to make a movie that's a family movie, I mean, what is your tagline for Inside Out? Like, oh, this young girl is sad and her emotions talk about it. The end. So yeah, I mean that. When you talk about WALL-E or Ratatouille, I mean those are very direct, easy to understand taglines and blurbs. It's a rat who learns how to be a chef, and robots in space. They're quasi-environmentalists. But no, I mean it's a difficult pitch, and the fact that not only did it perform admirably, it did really, really well at the box office and was very well received. And for the most part, stuck to its guns about what its intent was, even though it kind of fudged some of the science a little bit to.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't
get the story across.
You have to, look. Emotional science is really, really complicated. And really, really complex. So they did what they could. I appreciated they at least seemed to put the effort into making it somewhat realistic when other things would just not even care.
Right. It made the effort.
Yeah.
I don't think it stuck the landing, but it made the effort, and it was a nice change of pace. It was nice for a major studio that could have put out Cars 4 or whatever. To stick with this and then be rewarded for doing so. But no, I just appreciated the boldness of the movie, and I really wish Pixar did a lot more movies like this. they've been in a real slump for the last few years.
This kind of feel like in a lot of ways, kind of what we talked about Inception, where Inception was like a real kind of shot in a lot of ways, and then it worked. It was kind of nice to see it rewarded. So you're all right, and like it was nice to see they were rewarded for doing this, even if they're not really going to follow up anything with it. Just kind of what our message sadly was kind of about Inception as well.
Agreed. I'm a fan. Oh no, I was like, it's not my favorite Pixar, but I mean it's probably my second favorite. I mean it's up there.
Like a top tier group of Pixar films, and it's definitely in. It's like 4 of the film. It's definitely in that group.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
But Caillou, you have kind of long been on the island of. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. You don't hate this movie, but you don't like it nearly as much as everyone else does. So, go ahead and make your case.
I'm going to say I don't like this movie. It's not as strong as hate, but I've definitely, I think, dropped even a little bit since I've seen it. I think that
has grown in you.
I mean, part of it is just it's hard to maintain a nuanced position when everybody disagrees with you.
Yeah,
and I don't mean you guys. True. I mean just like everybody.
No, trust me, that I understand.
But I think there's a lot to find wanting in this film. Like, I don't think that a lot of it is necessarily bad. I just think I looked at this film and I'm like, I feel like these characters are generic. I feel like the story is generic. I feel like the emotions of it are not as complex as I would like. I mean, sitting here thinking about it, as listening to you guys, I was thinking about the fact that, and I hadn't thought of this before, that this is fairly similar to Where the Wild Things Are, in terms of like representing the child's like internal emotions. And I think the emotions are more complicated and the characters more complicated in that film. I think that this one is not super visually interesting to me. Like, I think it's well designed, but in a way that's kind of sterile. I think it takes a lot of easy turns in the script. Like, I have nothing against the concept of this movie, and I just feel like the movie never like went beyond that concept. Whereas like the great Pixar movies have a lot of individual moments in them and bits of texture and bits of detail to recommend them. And other than the Bing Bong thing in this, which like I liked Bing Bong, but I felt like this was a little emotionally manipulative. Just them trying to like, after Up's much lauded montage made everybody cry. I think Pixar has kind of gone like, we should have a scene in every movie where somebody cries. So that this felt like that. I mean, it didn't work for me. It didn't really draw my interest. And yeah, I just like, I'm pretty down on it, especially compared to the heights that I know Pixar can achieve, where like, they can have something that's more nuanced and entertaining at the same time, and I think this kind of fills in both those fronts. So I'm definitely a hard no.
Using my Where the Wild Things argument against me.
Yep.
I see what you're doing here. I mean, there's not really much I can obviously argue against that. Like, this is a similar thing of like, I know a couple of people who haven't liked it as much. They kind of have similar complaints to you.
Yeah.
It kind of depends. There's some who I think who hate it even more. There's some who are just like, But, I just found most of it to work, and I think it did hit a lot of those heights. And I thought the Bing Bong thing, I guess the only thing I'll say, I thought the Bing Bong thing I thought it actually fit with what they were trying to tell about growing up. And that's why it didn't feel just as emotionally manipulative as it could have.
It did, but it also feels like a character who is created and enters the script at that moment, and is the kind of charismatic, goofy figure that he is, so that he can reach that ending, and it's sad. So it felt like the scenes were showing for me.
That's fair. Well, this is one of my more favorite films.
Yeah.
I've reached the scene, and definitely from Pixar. It's definitely still a yes for me. Amy, what about you? Is there anything else you want to add? And your vote changed in any way?
I want to point out that I think Caillou has some very good points. And, may not necessarily disagree with them, just don't agree to the same extent.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, still top tier Pixar for me. So yeah, it's a pass.
Okay, so that put it on the list. All right, I'm going to pause a second so I can count something.
Okay.
So just, I guess, don't talk or whatever's easiest for Kaidi. I think we should have 59 on the list, right? Because we had 46 total that unanimous 44 went through 40 of the 46. There's 15 already on there.
Yes.
Okay. So 59. Okay. Oh, well, the next question. 59. And I was like, I'm done. I'm like, no, I'm not. I need to count the other part.
Mm-hmm.
59, and there are...
It's 158. No.
158.
158 minus the ones that moved. So actually 158 minus 4? Because you moved up 2, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, minus the 2 I had to move, plus, but we're adding 2 in, so that's why.
Okay, so it's 156.
156. Wait, why was there?
Because 2 of them were duplicated twice. Remember?
Oh, I see. Because they're from both your lists.
Yes.
So it's 156. Okay, then we add 2 back on. So 156. Oh, and then you discount the fact that I accidentally include Inside Out in mine again.
No. So it's 155.
155. Well, the actual question I wanted to see though was, so Amy should have 50 films still, because you take away, or no, 49. Take off the 2.
I have 50 on my list. Yes.
She has 50 minus Dear Zachary and the
Kiss
other one
Kiss
you moved
Baby.
up. Kiss Kiss. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then she adds 1 back on with Pirate, so 49.
Yeah.
And then you would have 51.
Yeah.
And then I would have 55. Take off Inside Out, add Wind Rises.
Yeah. That seems right.
So 49, 51. Does that add up correctly?
I don't know. What are the 3 numbers?
Yes, 155. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And then we just need that. Nah. Computer, don't be a dick. Oh my God. All right, with that concludes our discussion about the films there was any real consensus on. The next thing we're going to do is kind of discuss, next episodes we'll discuss kind of, we'll actually go in discussing just briefly what our top 10s were, and there was 7 total films from the 3 of our top 10 lists that were in fact not on anyone else's list, so we're going to kind of give a special mention to those, and people will talk about exactly why they love them so much. And then we also
there were 8. Not
no,
7.
there wasn't. You put the Prestige twice.
I put the Prestige twice on my list.
We put the Prestige as a something left off, even though we talked about that as a unanimous film.
Oh, it was unanimous. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. My fault.
Yeah, that's fine. No,
Sorry.
I saw that and just went, whatever. It's fine. I'll just start again. Or not start again, but there are 7 films that were from our each combined top 10 list that no one else agreed upon. So we're going to kind of take a little special time to talk about those, since those each hold a special place in the voter's heart. And then in addition, we have 155 more films we will eventually discuss. And for, as of now, trying to fill, we are at 59 movies, so 41 spots. That is spot list will actually likely go down after discussing top 10, but that kind of gives you an idea of how crazy this is all about to get once we start really arguing for about 30-something spots amongst 150 movies. So look forward to what will sure to be a lot of hair pulling and Caillou screaming at us about not listening to him, even though we're all fine with it.
You're all gonna regret everything that you've done.
Until then, that's it for this edition of the podcast. As always, you can find our other thoughts about pop culture on our blog, www.insidethekraken.com. You can also find out Amy's thoughts on Twitter at...
It's at _Atomica_.
That's it for now. We have to go and set up a bunch of projectors in the projectorium because the Kraken hasn't seen a lot of these movies and he needs to, in fact, watch them all at once.
Is that like the vomitorium, the projectatorium?
Yep.
Is it projecting from inside the Kraken? Like how is he going to watch it? Like does he have to open his mouth?
Kraken does whatever he wants. He exists. Look, his body is like an interdimensional.
Yeah,
it's fine. The body's not really there. It's like he sees.
Okay. Everybody hit stop and send me your 3.5-hour fucking file.
Yeah, that's why I was just like, we were talking about this and I was like, oh god, Kai was right.
Yep.
Well, it's fine. I decided to let this one go because.
Yes, you did.
Well, you guys really wanted to talk about some stuff. This is what happens when I haven't seen enough of the movies. I thought that would go faster. It went worse. I was like, no, this is good. We're going to skip over them. Then I was like, nope, that failed.
Is this part 5?
Yeah, this is top 100.
Part
5.
No, I ultimately let it go because...
Put your name on it.
As I said before, the next one we'll talk about the 7 and I basically make an hour-long podcast. But I'm going to develop an actual timer for the last bit.
How the hell are we doing the last bit? Like what in terms of voting? Because we can't just I know because we're not gonna match the spaces we have.
Hold on, give me 1 second. Well, I need to save this properly first.
Okay, I'm gonna stop broadcast.